Hello beautiful people, welcome to Savage Harry. In today's episode we explore what if Harry Potter fell for the shy and cute Pansy Parkinson. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The One Who Reads in the Rain. The storm came in from the north on a Thursday, which Harry thought was deeply unfair. Thursday was the one afternoon he had no lessons, no Quidditch practice, no Dumbledore summoning him to the office for another careful, curated memory in a glass bowl. Thursday was supposed to be his. He'd been planning it since Monday, a long walk around the lake, maybe sitting on the bank and doing absolutely nothing in particular, which was a luxury so rare at Hogwarts that he'd started treating it like a scheduled event. Instead, the sky had turned the color of old iron by noon, and by 2 o'clock the rain was coming sideways, hammering the tall windows of Gryffindor Tower in sheets so thick the grounds had disappeared entirely. Harry sat in the window seat on the third landing, not the common room, which was full of fourth years playing Exploding Snap too loudly, with his knees drawn up and his copy of Advanced Potion-Making open across his lap, and he watched the rain erase the world. He wasn't reading. He hadn't been reading for at least 20 minutes. The book was just something to hold. His eyes had drifted, the way they did when he wasn't careful, and landed on a figure at the edge of the lake. At first he thought he was imagining it. Nobody went to the lake in weather like this, not even the giant squid was visible through the gray. The water's surface churned and pocked with rainfall so heavy it looked almost solid. But the figure was real. A person sitting on the low stone bench near the water's edge, the one that faced away from the castle that looked out across the water toward the forbidden forest on the opposite bank. Small, still. Not moving despite the fact that the rain was very clearly not a drizzle or a passing squall but a full-throated Scottish storm with serious intentions. Harry squinted. Couldn't make out much. Dark robes, dark hair, the pale suggestion of hands holding something in their lap. They were reading, or they were trying to read, which under the circumstances was either impressive, deeply stubborn, or some combination of the two that Harry found himself unexpectedly interested in. He watched for a moment longer. The figure turned a page. Actually turned a page in the middle of a rainstorm with the kind of deliberate, unhurried motion that suggested they were fully aware of the weather and had simply decided it wasn't relevant to what they were doing. Harry almost laughed. He didn't know why. It wasn't funny exactly. It was just strange, oddly specific. The kind of detail that didn't fit anywhere in the picture he'd built of Hogwarts and everyone in it, and so it lodged somewhere in the back of his mind and stayed there like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. He looked back down at his potions book, read the same sentence 3 times. When he looked up again, the figure was gone. Ron found him in the corridor outside the Great Hall before dinner, already talking before he'd quite rounded the corner, which was Ron's standard method of conversation. Told Seamus it wasn't a fair trade. A chocolate frog card for a whole bottle of butterbeer. That's robbery, that is, even if it is a holographic Merlin. Harry, you look weird. What's wrong with your face? Nothing, Harry said. What? You've got that look. Ron fell into step beside him, both of them navigating the pre-dinner surge of students through the corridor. The one where you're thinking about something but pretending you're not. I'm not pretending anything. You're doing it right now. I'm walking, Ron, thoughtfully, Harry sighed. This was the problem with having friends who had known you for 6 years. They built up an archive of your expressions and could cross-reference them with alarming accuracy. I just saw someone sitting outside by the lake in that storm earlier, reading. Ron stared at him. In that rain, the actual rain that was happening? Yeah, who? Couldn't tell, too far away. Ron processed this for a moment, then shrugged in the way that indicated he'd filed the information under Harry's occasional strange observations and moved on. Probably some Ravenclaw. They do things like that. Remember that 5th year who used to study in the owlery, smelled like feathers for the entire year. Maybe, Harry said. He dropped it. They went into the Great Hall and ate dinner, and Ron talked at length about the Chudley Cannons' catastrophic performance in their recent match against the Ballycastle Bats. And Hermione arrived 20 minutes late with ink on her nose, and a stack of books she absolutely did not need to bring to dinner. And the evening unwound the way evenings at Hogwarts generally did, noisy and warm and layered with the specific comfortable chaos of several hundred people coexisting in a very old building. Harry laughed at the right moments and passed the bread basket and answered when he was spoken to, and the whole time in the back of his head a figure sat at the edge of a storm-gray lake and turned a page without hurrying. The Slug Club dinner the following Friday was, in Harry's considered opinion, one of the more irritating fixtures of his 6th year. It wasn't that Slughorn was terrible. He wasn't. He was warm and enthusiastic, and his office always smelled of crystallized pineapple and good wine. And his stories were genuinely interesting if you could get past the name-dropping, which admittedly required some effort. The problem was the nature of the gathering itself: collected, curated, deliberate. Slughorn chose people the way a jeweler chose stones, and Harry was always aware that the reason he'd been selected had absolutely nothing to do with his actual personality and everything to do with being the walking conclusion of a prophecy. He was a collector's piece, a famous name with legs. He'd mentioned this to Hermione once. She'd told him that was reductive and that Slughorn clearly valued him as a student, and then she'd paused and said, "Well, mostly," which had been more honest but not particularly comforting. The gathering that Friday was smaller than usual. 8 students, gathered in Slughorn's comfortable, overfurnished sitting room with its floating candles and its preposterous assortment of framed photographs. McLaggen was there, unfortunately, already occupying the largest chair with the energy of someone who had never once doubted his right to the largest chair. Blaise Zabini sat near the window, looking effortlessly bored in the way that only Blaise Zabini could manage. Ginny had been invited again, which Harry was glad about. Having Ginny in a room made it immediately more navigable. A Hufflepuff 6th year whose name Harry could never quite retain was perched on the edge of the settee, looking thrilled and terrified in equal measure. And then Pansy Parkinson walked in. Harry noticed her partly because she was the last to arrive, and partly because the way she moved was so precisely controlled that it pulled attention the way something very still in a moving environment always did. She wore her robes correctly, her dark hair smooth, her expression arranged into something pleasant that didn't quite commit to being a smile. She greeted Slughorn with a politeness so practiced it was almost architectural. The structure of it was perfect. You could see all the load-bearing walls, but you couldn't see anything that was actually inside. She sat down in the chair closest to the door, which Harry noticed was not an accident. The chair nearest the door was also the chair furthest from McLaggen, which showed sound tactical judgment. He'd been to 4 of these dinners. He wasn't sure he'd ever exchanged more than 5 consecutive words with Pansy Parkinson. She moved through the Slytherin orbit around Draco, always present, always composed, delivering occasional sharp observations in that voice that could cut glass. And Harry had categorized her largely as a background character in the ongoing drama of Draco Malfoy's various schemes, present, adjacent, not especially important. He looked at her now, sitting straight-backed and attentive while Slughorn launched into an anecdote about Tiberius Ogden and a mishap involving a vanishing cabinet, and he thought about the figure at the lake. It hit him strangely, without warning, the way things sometimes did. The dark hair, the small, still shape, the deliberate turning of a page. He almost dismissed it. It was a thin connection, dark hair and a lake and a feeling. But then Slughorn was gesturing expansively and saying, "Which brings me rather neatly to my reason for gathering you all here. I've arranged a small group assignment, a practical challenge to cap off our first Slug Club term." And Harry stopped thinking about it because the word assignment had the same effect on his nervous system as a starting pistol. The assignment, as Slughorn explained it with evident delight, was a collaborative potions project. Each student would be paired with another, and the pairs would brew a potion of moderate complexity over the following 3 weeks, with the result to be presented at the final Slug Club dinner of term. The pairing, he said cheerfully, had been done at random, and Harry watched the room absorb this news with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "Harry, my boy," Slughorn said, consulting the small piece of parchment in his hand with the satisfied expression of a man who has arranged things exactly as he wanted and is now pretending he hasn't. "You'll be paired with, Miss Parkinson." Ginny caught Harry's eye from across the room and raised an eyebrow precisely 3 millimeters. Harry looked back at Slughorn and said, "Right, sure," in a voice that he hoped sounded normal. He glanced at Pansy. She was looking at Slughorn with an expression of polite equanimity that gave away nothing at all. "Wonderful," Slughorn beamed. "You may take a moment to introduce yourselves or reintroduce, given that you're practically neighbors in these halls, while I organize the starter course." He bustled off toward the side table, and the room fractured into smaller conversations. McLaggen immediately cornered Zabini, which meant Zabini would spend the next 10 minutes looking like he was considering whether social murder was possible, and if so, whether it was worth the paperwork. Ginny was paired with the thrilled and terrified Hufflepuff and was already being wonderfully kind to them in the way that Ginny managed kindness, direct and unself-conscious, like it cost her nothing. Harry picked up his glass and moved to the chair adjacent to Pansy's because it seemed rude to make her come to him. She watched him cross the room. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted in a way Harry couldn't name, a brief recalculation maybe. He was familiar with that look. He'd seen it on a lot of faces over 6 years. It was the look of someone updating their read of a situation. "Hi," Harry said, sitting down. "Potter," she said. "It's Harry. We're going to be brewing together for 3 weeks." First names seemed practical. A pause, not a rude pause, just a small one, the kind that meant something was being considered. "Pansy," she said. "I know. You know my name. We've been in the same school for 6 years." "You'd be surprised," she said, in a tone that was entirely even, "how many people our age would struggle to recall it without prompting." Harry wasn't sure if she was being sardonic or matter-of-fact, and he had the impression she'd arranged it that way deliberately. "What potion do you want to do?" he asked. That apparently was the right question because something in her posture shifted, so slightly that he might have imagined it, a degree or two away from composed and toward something else. She looked at him directly for the first time, which he noticed because most people in his vicinity either looked at him too much or developed an interest in the middle distance. Pansy did neither. She looked at him like she was deciding whether the conversation was worth having. "Wiggenweld," she said. "It's a healing potion. Complex enough to be interesting, practical enough that Slughorn will appreciate the pragmatism. It requires synchronized brewing in the final stage, which is actually easier with 2 people than 1, provided both people know what they're doing." Harry considered this. That sounds good. Do you already know how to brew it?" "Most of it. I've been reading about healing magic independently." She said this without particular emphasis, as though it were a neutral fact rather than a personal one. "Slughorn's curriculum doesn't cover it in sufficient depth." "You're interested in healing?" She looked at him again with that measuring quality. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised," Harry said, which wasn't entirely true but wasn't a lie either. He was recalibrating, not surprised. There was a difference. "I just didn't know." "There's no particular reason you would have," she said, not unkindly, not particularly kindly either, just accurately. Slughorn reappeared with a levitating tray of tiny, perfect canapés, and the conversation went general again, absorbed into the larger flow of the dinner. But Harry sat with Pansy's words for the rest of the evening. Their precise, unadorned quality, the way she'd stated facts about herself like she was reporting data rather than performing, and he thought about the lake and the rain and the careful turning of a page. He mentioned it to Hermione the next morning over breakfast. Not the lake part, just the Slug Club part, the pairing, the Wiggenweld potion. Hermione's response was immediate and enthusiastic, which meant she had opinions about Wiggenweld which he'd expected, and then she said, "Pansy Parkinson?" in a tone that had several layers in it that Harry didn't want to unpick before he'd finished his coffee. "She suggested it," Harry said. "It's a good choice, Hermione. You've literally just described why it's a good choice." "I know it's a good choice," Hermione said. She stopped, arranged her thoughts. Hermione always arranged her thoughts before she deployed them in situations that required precision. "She's clever," she said finally. "Genuinely, she gets top marks in ancient runes and she's very good in potions. She's also a Slytherin," Harry said. "I was going to say complicated," Hermione said, and her tone was careful in the specific way that meant she was resisting the urge to lecture. "Harry, her family are almost certainly Death Eaters. Or sympathizers at minimum." "I know. And Draco, I know." Hermione, she looked at him. He looked back, she sighed, which was Hermione's version of standing down, not surrender, just a tactical pause. "I'm just saying be careful. She might be perfectly pleasant and also still be reporting back to people who'd rather you weren't alive. Those things can both be true." "I know," Harry said for the 3rd time because he wasn't naive. He'd spent 6 years in a world where people wore multiple faces as easily as robes, and the years since Voldemort's return had made him considerably more alert to the space between what people showed and what they kept. He wasn't under any illusions about Pansy Parkinson, but he also kept thinking about her voice when she said healing magic, not the words themselves but the cadence of them, the quiet way they landed, like she'd put them down carefully rather than thrown them out for effect. Ron, who had been listening while systematically dismantling a plate of kippers, looked up and said, "She did once try to get you kicked off the Quidditch team in 3rd year. She tried to get everyone on the Gryffindor team suspended. It wasn't personal." "It was a bit personal," Ron said. "Everything's a bit personal with Slytherins," Harry said. "That's fine, I can deal with complicated." Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. They communicated something in the wordless shorthand that 6 years of close friendship had built between them, a language Harry could read well enough to know they were filing this under watch, this space, and leaving him to it. Which was ultimately the right call. Sunday afternoon the rain came back. Less dramatic than Thursday's storm but persistent in a way that was almost worse. A low, relentless gray that pressed against the castle windows and turned the ground soft and misted. Harry finished his transfiguration essay, abandoned a half-hearted attempt at divination homework on the grounds that Professor Trelawney had told him he was going to die in at least 4 different ways this term, and he decided to stop engaging with the subject on principle, and found himself restless in the common room with nothing that urgently needed doing. He went for a walk. This was how he ended up in the corridor outside the library at 3:30 in the afternoon, which was not a place Harry Potter was generally found of his own free will on a Sunday. He'd had a vague intention of finding a different route back from a loop of the 7th floor, but his feet had taken him here instead, operating on some logic below conscious thought that he hadn't quite caught up to. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, she was quiet. It was the sound of a page turning and then the small, specific sound of someone underlining something. The library door was slightly ajar, and Harry, who had not intended to stop, stopped. He didn't go in. He just paused. Through the gap in the door he could see one of the smaller study tables at the far side, not visible from Madame Pince's desk. And Pansy was sitting there with 3 books open around her and a 4th flat in her hands, and she was reading with her whole body focused on it, the kind of reading that was also thinking, where you could see the work happening across someone's face. She had a quill in her hand and she was making notes on a long piece of parchment, fast and neat, and there was something around her, an atmosphere like a field, that was entirely different from the Pansy who sat at dinner with the Slytherins or the Pansy who had sat in Slughorn's office with her polite, perfect composure. She looked younger. That was the closest Harry could get to naming it. Or maybe not younger, just more actual. Like the version of herself she kept inside the other version. He stood there for exactly 3 seconds longer than was defensible, and then he moved on before she could look up and find him staring into the library like someone experiencing a significant malfunction. He walked back to the common room with his hands in his pockets and his thoughts running slightly ahead of him, and he did not tell Ron or Hermione, and he did not think about it consciously for the rest of the evening. But he noticed, around midnight, lying awake in the darkened dormitory with the rain still brushing the windows, that he was thinking about it anyway. Monday delivered defense against the dark arts in the morning, and a free period afterward that Harry spent mostly trying not to fall asleep in the chair in the entrance hall, having achieved only 5 hours of sleep and being annoyed at himself for the reason. He was halfway through a cold cup of tea when Neville sat down next to him with the satisfied expression of someone who had just had a good lesson. Herbology, Harry guessed. Professor Sprout let us replant the mandrake beds, Neville confirmed. All 4 of us, proper work, not just watching. The secondary shoots were, Harry, you actually want to hear this? Genuinely, Harry said. Tell me about the mandrakes. Neville did, in the full and affectionate detail that Neville brought to anything involving plants, and Harry drank his cold tea and listened. And it was easy and comfortable the way things with Neville had become over the last year or so, the gradual, unforced deepening of something that had started as proximity and become actual friendship. Neville was in the middle of explaining the distinction between a healthy secondary shoot and an overstimulated one when he paused and said, "Isn't that Pansy Parkinson? She's staring at you." Harry looked up. She wasn't staring. She was crossing the entrance hall from the direction of the dungeons, and she had happened to glance in his direction, and when his eyes met hers, she looked away immediately, with the smooth economy of someone who has a lot of practice at redirecting attention. Then she looked back, which suggested the look away had been reflex rather than intention. Harry raised his eyebrows in what he hoped was a sufficiently normal expression. She held his gaze for a moment, just a moment, and then she was past, heading toward the marble staircase, robes moving quietly around her. "She your potions partner?" Neville asked. "Slug Club," Harry said. "Yeah. She's really good at runes," Neville said in the tone of someone contributing a useful fact. "She helped me once actually, 2nd year. I'd got something wrong in my translation and she corrected it without making it into a thing. She just told me what it should be and went back to her work." Harry looked at him. "Pansy Parkinson helped you in runes class." "I know," Neville said mildly. "We contain multitudes." Harry laughed, which he hadn't expected to. Neville smiled, pleased. "She doesn't like people knowing she's helpful," Neville continued, picking up the thought again. "I got the impression it would have embarrassed her if I'd thanked her too much. So I just said thanks and got on with it. She seemed to prefer that." "Yeah," Harry said slowly. "I think I'm starting to get that impression too." The first proper Slug Club brewing session was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. Harry arrived at the potions classroom exactly on time, which he considered an achievement given that it was in the dungeons, and he'd come from the 7th floor after a defense revision session with Ron that had run over. Pansy was already there. She'd arranged the workspace, ingredients sorted and laid out in the order they'd be needed. the two cauldrons already set to the correct temperature, her personal copy of the relevant chapter from Magical Healing. Intermediate theory open beside her own copy of the Half-Blood Prince's annotated textbook, because Slughorn had told them they could use any reference materials they chose, and Pansy had evidently taken this seriously. She'd also, Harry noticed, pushed the second stool to exactly the right position for a second person to work comfortably at the bench. She hadn't had to do that, she'd done it anyway. She looked up when he came in. "You're on time," she said. "I said I would be." "People often say things," she observed. Harry set down his bag and looked over the workspace. "This is impressive," he said, because it was. She looked at the bench as though she'd forgotten she'd done it. "It's just organization. It's good organization. I'd have put everything in the wrong order." Something crossed her expression, brief, involuntary, gone almost before it was there, like the ghost of being pleased. "You've read the method, twice," Harry said. "The synchronized final stage, we need to add the Dittany and the Ashwinder eggs simultaneously, right? Different hands, same second." "You did read it." She said it without inflection, but it wasn't nothing. "Told you I would." "People often say things," Harry finished. "I heard you the first time." She looked at him for a fraction longer than before, then she pulled on her gloves and said, "We should start with the base. The willow bark needs 40 minutes at low heat before anything else goes in," and Harry sat down on the stool she'd positioned and they began. It was not what he'd expected. He wasn't sure what he'd expected exactly. Some version of careful politeness maybe. Negotiated cooperation. Two people working parallel to each other and calling it a pair. What actually happened was better and stranger than that. Pansy knew the potion. Not in the way Harry knew things he'd revised, not retrieved from memory with effort, but in the fluent physical way of someone who had thought about something so many times it had become instinctive. She moved through the steps with absolute certainty, and when Harry moved wrong, reached for the wrong stirring direction in the third stage, old muscle memory from a different potion, her hand came out and stopped his without hesitation. "Counterclockwise until the color changes," she said, then back. Her hand was on his wrist. She pulled it away immediately as though she'd surprised herself. "Sorry," Harry said, counterclockwise. "Don't apologize, just," she gestured at the cauldron. "Watch the color, it'll go from amber to green, that's your signal." "Got it," he watched. The potion shifted, amber bleeding into a pale, clear green like light through a bottle. Now," she said, and they both adjusted their stir direction at the same moment, and the potion's surface went smooth and faintly luminescent, and Pansy made a small sound that Harry realized after a moment with satisfaction. "That's right," she said quietly to the potion rather than to him. "You really care about this," Harry said, not an accusation, just an observation he hadn't been able to keep inside. She didn't look up. "Most things worth doing are worth caring about. I meant healing specifically." A pause, the willow bark simmered. Somewhere in the dungeon corridor, footsteps passed and receded. "My mother was ill," she said, "when I was 9, for almost a year. The healers, they helped eventually, but there were months where they weren't sure." She stopped, as though she'd come to the edge of a room she hadn't meant to walk into. "I decided I wanted to understand it, how it worked. Why some things helped and some things didn't." Harry didn't say "I'm sorry" because she hadn't offered the story for sympathy. He could feel that. She'd offered it if she'd offered it at all, if it was possible that it had just slipped out as a plain fact, not a wound displayed for comfort. "And you've been studying it since then?" he asked. "On and off," she said. "There's not much of it in the curriculum. Slughorn doesn't cover healing potions beyond basics. I've been working through texts on my own." She looked at him sidelong, "Which I realize makes me sound peculiar." "It makes you sound like Hermione," Harry said. "Which I mean as a genuine compliment." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely, almost entirely dismissible, but it moved. "Granger would be horrified to hear you say that," she said. "Probably," Harry agreed. "Don't tell her." The almost smile lasted approximately 2 seconds, and then her attention went back to the potion, and the color was settling to something deep and clear. And Harry thought that this, whatever was beginning or not beginning in a dungeon classroom on a Thursday evening over a healing potion, was something he hadn't expected and didn't entirely know what to do with. He thought that was probably fine. He'd handled unexpected things before. He was, if nothing else, very good at unexpected. He took a different route back from the dungeons that night, longer, up through the ground floor and past the library rather than the more direct stair. He told himself this was because he wanted to walk. He didn't examine the claim especially hard. The library was dark. Madame Pince kept strict hours. The corridor outside it was lit by a single torch that cast long shadows down the stone floor, and Harry walked through them thinking about a potion turning from amber to green, and a hand on his wrist that had pulled away immediately, and the flat, careful way someone could say "my mother was ill," as though they were holding something very fragile at arm's length. He thought about the lake and the rain and the page turning. He thought about the way she'd set out the second stool. He went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a while and thought this is probably going to complicate things, and then he thought yes, well, and then he fell asleep. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The grounds lay quiet and wet under a clearing sky, and the black lake was glass-dark and still, and the stone bench at the water's edge was empty and glistening, and somewhere in the castle 200 people slept toward morning, and somewhere in that number a girl with dark hair and a book she never stopped reading turned over in her sleep, and whatever was beginning kept quietly beginning, the way things do in the dark between one thing and the next. Chapter 2, Runes and Rubble. The ancient runes classroom was on the 4th floor, in a part of the castle that most students had no reason to visit unless they'd chosen the subject, which meant the corridor leading to it was almost always quiet. Harry had passed it maybe a dozen times in 6 years without ever going in. The door was old oak, darker than the surrounding stone, with a carved lintel that someone had filled with actual runes at some point. Not decorative, proper ones, layered and precise, and Harry had always clocked it in the vague peripheral way you registered things that weren't relevant to you. He registered it properly for the first time on Tuesday morning because Pansy Parkinson was standing outside it. She wasn't waiting for anything as far as he could tell. She was early, the corridor was empty, no other students yet, and she was reading something, standing with her back against the wall beside the door and her book tilted toward the torch light. And she didn't look up when Harry came around the corner, which meant she hadn't heard him, which meant she was very far into whatever she was reading. Harry had come this way because the staircase on the east side was closer to the defense corridor where he'd just come from, and this route to the 5th floor was faster. That was the reason. He told himself this with some conviction as he slowed his pace without quite deciding to. She was annotating. Even standing in a corridor, she was annotating, quill in her left hand, making marks in the margin in handwriting so small he couldn't read it from this distance. And the efficiency of it, the total self-contained focus, was the same quality he'd seen Sunday in the library and Thursday in the dungeon, and every time he saw it he had the same response, which was to find it interesting in a way he couldn't entirely account for. He was going to walk past. He had defense homework and breakfast hadn't been sufficient, and Ron was expecting him in the common room. He was absolutely going to keep walking. "What's the rune for protection?" he asked. She looked up without startlement, which itself was notable. Most people, surprised mid-concentration, had some kind of physical reaction. Pansy just raised her eyes from the page and looked at him with the composed attention of someone who had been faintly aware of his presence all along and had simply been waiting to see if he'd say something. "Alges," she said. "Though the application varies depending on whether you want passive warding or active deflection." "Why, my defense essay. I'm trying to cross-reference between runic warding and modern spell theory, and I'm not certain I've got the right framework." She considered him for a moment. "You're doing that voluntarily," Hermione suggested it. She said it would elevate the essay from competent to excellent, and she wasn't wrong. "Granger's rarely wrong about academic frameworks," Pansy said in a tone that managed to be both honest and extremely reluctant. "She'd appreciate hearing that too if you ever want to say it to her face." "I don't feel that strongly about it." But there was something in her voice, not quite amusement but the structural precursor to it. She closed the book in her hand, keeping her finger on the page, which meant she wasn't finished with it. "The framework you want is Sowillo paired with Alges. Sowillo is the strengthening rune, it amplifies the protective effect. Modern warding charms like Protego are derived from exactly that pairing, though the academic consensus." She stopped. "You don't actually need this much detail for a defense essay." "Keep going," Harry said. "I'm interested." She looked at him the same way she'd looked at him Thursday, the measuring way, like she was reassessing something she'd already filed. "You're either a good liar or you genuinely mean that," she said. "I genuinely mean it." "How do you know the runic basis for Protego?" "I traced it back myself. It's not in the standard curriculum. Babbling doesn't cover the spell origin theory, she focuses on translation. But if you read the primary sources." She stopped again. "You're doing it on purpose," she said flatly. "Doing what? Getting me to talk about runes." "I asked a question, you answered it. If you want to stop, stop." She held his gaze. "Alges Swillow," she said. "Write that down before you forget it." The essay framework should position warding as a translation of runic logic into spoken magic, not a replacement of it. Snape, Slughorn, any examiner will respond well to that angle. "You nearly said Snape," Harry observed. "Habit," she said with the single-word finality of someone closing a door firmly but without slamming it. Harry nodded, didn't push. He filed that under things to notice and asked instead, do you prefer it, runes over potions? She thought about it, which he appreciated. She didn't perform considering things, she actually did it, and the small pause before she answered was real thinking rather than social theater. They're different pleasures, she said eventually. Potions is chemistry, the satisfaction is in precision, you do the right thing in the right order and the result is predictable. Runes is more like translation. You're reading something that was written to last, trying to understand what someone was thinking 1,000 years ago. The satisfaction is in comprehension rather than execution. You like both, Harry said. I like most things that require actual effort, she said, and it wasn't pointed at him, it was just true, stated without decoration. Down the corridor the first sounds of other students arriving drifted up from the staircase, voices, footsteps, the distant bang of a door. Pansy's attention shifted fractionally, registering it, and something in her posture changed, a subtle, barely visible adjustment like a window being pulled to. Not closed, just reduced. Harry saw it happen. He wasn't sure she knew he'd seen it. I'll just swallow, he said. I've got it, thanks. It was a 30-second conversation. Still counts. He moved to continue up the corridor, then paused. Thursday, same time, we agreed to Thursdays, she said. I know, I'm just confirming. It was agreed, she said. Thursday, he went. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of her book opening again. The defense essay came together surprisingly well, which Harry attributed to Pansy's framework and Hermione's structure, and his own ability to actually write the thing which he tended to underestimate. Professor Lupin, who was not Professor Lupin anymore and hadn't been for years, but the space in Harry's head labeled defense teacher still carried Lupin's general shape. In this case was replaced by a compact, sharp-featured woman named Professor Aldrich who had the academic background of a scholar and the manner of someone who had also, at some point in her career, actually been in several fights and found them instructive. She returned the essay on Wednesday with a exceeds expectations and a margin note that said well-grounded theoretical framework. Where did the runic cross-reference originate? He wrote back, suggested by a classmate. Professor Aldrich wrote, cultivate that classmate. Harry looked at the note for a moment and folded the essay into his bag and said nothing to anyone. Wednesday evenings were when the Slug Club met informally, not the full dinners, just a loose gathering in Slughorn's office for students to update him on their projects, share progress, ask for guidance. Harry had been once before and found it more bearable than the formal dinners, mostly because there was no McLaggen. He had Quidditch practice on Wednesday evenings and apparently valued it over Slughorn's company, which Harry considered one of McLaggen's few redeeming qualities. He arrived at 7 to find Slughorn holding court with Zabini, and a Ravenclaw seventh year about wandless magic, which was Slughorn's way of doing things. You never quite had a private conversation with him. Always one conducted within earshot of others whom you were presumably meant to impress. Ginny was there, skimming through one of the reference books from Slughorn's shelves, with the easy confidence of someone who treated other people's bookshelves as public resources. She looked up when Harry came in and said, he's been waiting for the Wiggenweld update, with the fond warning of someone delivering intelligence. Harry got himself a glass of pumpkin juice and waited for his turn, which came about 12 minutes later when Slughorn swiveled his considerable warmth in Harry's direction like a lighthouse beam. Harry, and Miss Parkinson not with you? Harry turned. Pansy was in the doorway. She'd arrived and he hadn't heard her, which was becoming a pattern. She came in without hurrying and said, "Good evening, Professor," and went to stand on Harry's left with the self-contained neatness of someone taking up exactly the amount of space they intended to take up and not 1 inch more. Slughorn rubbed his hands together. "Splendid. Now, Wiggenweld potion, a bold choice. How have you got on?" "We've completed the base preparation," Pansy said. "The willow bark reduction was successful. We achieved the correct luminescence on the first attempt. Next session will begin the secondary infusion stage," she said without hesitation or comment, and Harry noticed that stored it somewhere. "First attempt," Slughorn beamed at Harry. "Quite something, given the sensitivity of the base reduction. Cooperation, that's the key, isn't it?" "Pansy did most of the technical guidance," Harry said honestly. Slughorn looked at her with the particular warmth he reserved for students he was pleased with in ways that had useful social implications. Pansy's family name had weight in certain circles, and Slughorn collected weight in circles the way he collected famous names. "Healing magic," he said, "a noble area of study. Your mother is quite well now, I trust?" Something happened in Pansy's face, a compression barely visible, like a book being closed very quickly. "Quite well, thank you," she said. Slughorn moved on the way Slughorn always did, orbiting to the next satellite, and Harry and Pansy were briefly in the pocket of quiet that forms in rooms when the loudest person is looking the other way. "Does everyone know?" she asked. Her voice was low and perfectly controlled. "He collects information," Harry said. "About all of us. It's what he does." "I know what he does," a beat. "I was asking a different question." Harry looked at her. "No," he said, "I haven't told anyone and I won't." She didn't say thank you. She looked at him for a long moment with something in her expression that was more complicated than gratitude and less definable. And then she turned to look at Slughorn's bookshelves with an air of casual interest. And Harry turned the other way, and they stood in companionable non-conversation for the remainder of the gathering while the room moved around them. The common room that night was noise and firelight, and the familiar cacophony of about 30 Gryffindors all doing different things at the same volume. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione at their usual table by the window, rain again tapping the glass, and Hermione was deep in revision for something that wouldn't be examined for 4 months, but which she was treating as an ongoing emergency. Ron was playing chess against himself, which he did when bored and which looked from the outside like a man arguing with furniture. "Hermione," Harry said, "what do you know about the Parkinson family?" Ron's knight turned and looked at him. Hermione lowered her book. "Why?" she said, "for context. Slug Club project. I like to understand who I'm working with." She studied him for a moment with the particular quality of attention she deployed when she thought she was being given partial information and wanted to let you know she knew it. Then she said, "Old family. Sacred 28. Her father is, there's nothing proven, but he's in Voldemort's social circles. The family has kept a lower profile than the Malfoys, but they're in the same orbit. Her mother had a serious illness about 6 or 7 years ago. She recovered, but it took a long time. Pansy was pulled from school for part of a term." She paused. "You already knew about the mother." "She mentioned it," Harry said. Hermione's expression did a thing. "She told you about her mother. In passing, Pansy Parkinson told you in passing about her mother's illness. She was explaining why she's interested in healing magic. It came up." Hermione looked at Ron. Ron looked at Hermione. The chess pieces waited. "She's interested in healing magic," Hermione said, and there were genuinely several things happening in her voice that Harry couldn't fully separate. "Apparently, privately, not for class." "Yes." Hermione put her book down properly, which meant she was committing to the conversation. "Harry, that's not nothing, she's kept that very close. I've been in runes and potions with her for 6 years and I didn't know that." "I know, which means she told you something she doesn't typically tell people." "Hermione," Harry said with the patience of someone who could see where this was going and wasn't objecting but needed it to move at a sensible pace. "I'm just noting it," she said with a return to her book that was slightly too deliberate to be casual. "It's an interesting data point. Keep your data points to yourself," Harry said pleasantly. "I will," Hermione said in the tone of someone who absolutely would not. Ron moved a bishop and the bishop knocked over the opposing rook and looked satisfied. "Just be careful, mate," he said without looking up. "Not about her specifically, just Draco's watching everything you do, has been for weeks, more than usual. If you start spending time with someone from his house." "I'm aware of Draco," Harry said. "Yeah, but Draco's not," Ron put down a pawn. "He's different this year. He's not doing the usual stuff, the sneering and the stupid comments. He's quiet. And Draco being quiet is worse than Draco being loud, because at least when he's loud you know where he is." Harry knew. He'd been thinking the same thing in roughly the same words for 2 months. Draco Malfoy in the 6th year was a stripped-down version of the person he'd been, quieter, thinner, the performance of superiority replaced by something tight and inward. Harry had followed him more than once, had caught glimpses, had not yet figured out what he was looking at, which was more unsettling than anything Draco had done in the preceding 5 years combined. "I know," he said again. "Good," Ron said and moved his knight, and the game descended into a brutal endgame that the knight won eventually on points, if not on dignity. Thursday came and Harry was in the potions classroom at 7 sharp, and Pansy was already there again, because apparently she was constitutionally incapable of being anywhere at the scheduled time rather than before it. She had the secondary ingredients lined up and the notes from their last session open on the bench, and she was reading them over with the same absorbed quality that Harry had now catalogued in approximately 4 different settings. "I looked up the Soillo-Alges framework," Harry said, dropping his bag. She looked up. "For the essay, after, for interest, you're right that it's in the primary sources. Babbling doesn't teach it. Most teachers teach what's in the examined curriculum and nothing else," she said. It's efficient. It's also why most students leave with competent knowledge rather than actual understanding. You sound like Hermione when you say that. She put the notes down. I don't, she said precisely. You really do. Something shifted in her expression, not quite offense, not quite amusement, something in between that she dealt with by turning to the cauldron. The secondary infusion requires us to add the lacewing flies before the temperature drops below 60 degrees, she said. Which means we need to move through the preparatory steps quickly. I've got the powdered bicorn horn, Harry said, finding it in his bag. Do I start now or after the lacewing flies? You're adding it to a base that's already at temperature, not building from scratch. She held out her hand without looking at him, and Harry, operating on instinct, put the jar in it. She set it aside at exactly the right position. Have you read the notes from Thursday? Twice, Harry said, on your recommendation. She stopped. I didn't recommend it. You said most things worth doing are worth caring about, and I applied it to the preparatory reading. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you have a surprisingly good memory for things I've said. I pay attention, Harry said, to potions notes. To things that seem worth paying attention to, he said, and left it there and went to a stool, and they started work. The secondary infusion was more demanding than the base reduction. It required sustained attention and multiple simultaneous variables. The temperature, the consistency, the timing of each addition, and a stirring rhythm that changed at intervals. Harry had brewed complicated potions before, under Snape and under Slughorn, and he was better at it than his early years had suggested, particularly since he found the Half-Blood Prince's book with its marginal notes that made everything feel comprehensible in a way standard instructions never had. But this was different. Brewing with someone else, actually with them rather than adjacent to them, required a kind of coordination that was almost physical. Pansy watched the temperature gauge. Harry handled the stirring rhythm. She told him when to change direction, and he did, and she added the lacewing flies at the precise moment without counting aloud, which meant she'd done this in her head the whole time, and the potion turned from murky blue to clear deep violet that she looked at with narrow, satisfied attention. That's right, she said for the second time to the potion. Then without transition, why do you pay attention? What? You said you pay attention to things worth paying attention to. Why is a potions project worth? She stopped, adjusted. Most people in your position would do the minimum necessary work and consider it sufficient. Most people in my position, Harry said, spend a lot of time being told what they are. I prefer figuring out what's actually in front of me. She stirred the potion 3 times clockwise without speaking. And what is in front of you? She asked. Her voice was entirely level. Someone who knows things, Harry said, and is mostly careful about who she knows them around. The potion simmered. The dungeon was quiet except for that and the distant drip of water from somewhere in the castle's lower depths that Harry had always found oddly comforting. I'm always careful, she said. I know, Harry said. That's what I said. She looked at him. The potion had stabilized to its correct color, and the next addition wasn't for 4 minutes, which meant they were temporarily suspended in the odd intimacy of a paused task with nothing immediately demanding attention. Why does it matter to you? She asked. Figuring out what's actually in front of you. You already know what I am. Slytherin old family Draco. She chose her next word with the care of someone navigating something she doesn't want to name. Social circle. The rest is footnote. The rest is the actual information, Harry said. The first part is just category. Category matters, she said. In my experience, category is what people act on. Then most people are lazy thinkers. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't look away either. She was doing the thing where she held his gaze a beat past the expected social duration, and Harry had started to understand that this was something she did when she was revising her read of something, when the data was arriving in a form that didn't match the existing model and she was deciding whether to update the model or discard the data. The bicorn horn, she said. You can start the preparation now. Harry reached for the jar. How fine? Powder, not dust. There's a difference, it's in the notes. Between powder and dust. Between a coarse powder and a fine one. The coarse one gives you texture in the finish that compromises the healing efficacy. If you want a potion that actually works, then get the grind right, Harry said. Got it. He started grinding. She added the Ashwender egg base. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the good kind, the kind that had content rather than tension, and Harry felt the ease of it in a way he hadn't entirely expected. He was comfortable here. He didn't think about it too carefully, just noted it the way you noted weather, a background condition of the moment. The essay went well, he said. Aldrich wrote a good note on the framework. Aldrich's rigorous, Pansy said. She responds to source theoretical grounding. She asked where the framework came from. Pansy's grinding motion paused for a fraction. What did you say? That a classmate suggested it. The grinding resumed. Adequate, she said, not going to say anything else about that. What would I say? You could say you're glad it worked. A pause. She stopped, tried again. Yes, I'm glad it worked. Harry smiled at the potion. He didn't make a thing of it. He just let the smile happen and then moved on. Right, coarse powder, not dust. 4 more minutes on the infusion. What comes after the bicorn horn? Shredded boomslang skin, she said. And then we leave it at controlled temperature for 20 minutes and then we start the final reduction. That's the stage that acute the equipment. The stage that what? That's what I wrote in the margin of the notes. Instead of writing final synchronized reduction, I wrote Akio equipment, because it's the part where we both have to move fast at the same time. She stared at him. That's in the notes, in the copy you don't have. Yes. That's, she pressed her lips together. That's actually a useful mnemonic device. You almost said it was funny. I said it was useful. You were about to smile. I was not, she said with the absolute composure of someone who had been about to smile. Pansy, the bicorn horn, she said. How is the grind? Harry looked down at the powder. Coarse, definitely coarse, not a speck of dust. Good, she said, and then without a preamble, quietly, like it had decided to come out without her permission. It was a bit funny. Harry laughed, not a polite laugh, just the real thing, sudden and unguarded. Pansy did not laugh, but she turned back to the cauldron with a speed that suggested she didn't want him to see whatever had happened to her face. And when she turned back, her expression was settled and composed again, but her eyes were different, a shade less guarded, a degree warmer, and Harry thought there you are without saying it, because some thoughts were better kept than spoken, at least for now. The potion settled into its 20-minute hold, and they sat at the bench on their respective stools in the low heat of the dungeon, and Pansy asked him about the defense essay, specifically the secondary argument, and he talked through it, and she asked sharp, specific questions that improved it while he answered, and neither of them acknowledged that this was significantly more conversation than a potions project required. The dungeon door opened. Harry heard it before he saw it, the particular heavy sound of that door which he'd been in this room enough times to recognize. He looked over his shoulder. Draco Malfoy stood in the doorway. He was still for a moment, taking in the room, Pansy at the bench, Harry on the adjacent stool, the potion between them and the scattered evidence of 2 hours of actual work. His face did several things in the space of 2 seconds, most of them controlled into nothing. What remained when the processing finished was a look so flat and unreadable that it was more unsettling than anything with visible content would have been. Pansy, he said. His voice was normal. Draco could make normal sound like a sentence with 8 meanings. Pansy turned. Whatever happened in her face when she saw him was also controlled. Harry was getting better at reading the things she controlled, and there was a brief tightening, something that was not quite anxiety but was adjacent to wariness. Draco, she said. I was looking for you, he said. He didn't look at Harry when he said it, which was more pointed than looking at him would have been. I sent a note, Pansy said. The Slug Club session runs until 9. It's 9:15, Draco said. Pansy glanced at the clock on the dungeon wall, and Harry watched her register that they'd overrun without noticing. He'd done the same, checked his watch, realized the same thing, and felt the small, peculiar warmth of the fact that neither of them had noticed time passing. We're finishing up, she said. I'll be 5 minutes. Draco looked at Harry then, directly. The quality of his attention was sharp in a way that had nothing to do with the usual competitive contempt Harry associated with him. This was different, more considered. Draco Malfoy was looking at Harry Potter with the expression of someone who has encountered a variable they didn't account for and are deciding how significant it is. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. The word landed flat between them with the weight of 6 years in a war and about 15 different unsaid things. Draco held his gaze for another beat, then looked back at Pansy. 5 minutes, he said, and left. The dungeon door closed. The room settled. Pansy looked at the potion, then at the clock, then began the efficient process of covering the cauldron correctly, the specific sequence that preserved the brewing state for the next session. He checks up on you, Harry said. He's concerned, she said. It's not the same thing. Okay, she sealed the cauldron, began putting away the surplus ingredients with the systematic neatness she brought to everything. Harry helped, passing things as she reached for them, and she accepted each one without acknowledging that she was accepting it, which he was also starting to read as a specific thing, her version of thank you when she hadn't decided to use words for it. He doesn't like this, Harry said. What he likes isn't the governing factor in what I do, she said, and it was firm enough to be true and complicated enough to be not entirely the whole truth. Harry looked at her. Is it going to be a problem? She considered this honestly, which he appreciated because it would have been very easy to say no quickly. I don't know, she said. Probably he'll make it one if it continues to be what it is. And what is it? She picked up her bag, looked at him. "A potions project," she said, and her voice was perfectly level and her eyes said something else entirely, and she walked to the door and pulled it open and added without turning, "Thursday," and was gone. Harry sat in the empty dungeon for a moment. The potion sat sealed and correct and deep violet behind glass, half-made and promising, smelling of willow and boomslang and something else underneath that he couldn't name. He picked up his bag and went. He ran into Neville on the stairs going up, which was fortunate because Neville had a very normalizing effect on his thought process. "Good session?" Neville asked. "Yeah," Harry said, "really good actually." "She knows her stuff?" Neville asked, and the question was carefully unloaded, just genuine curiosity from someone who'd already established his position on Pansy Parkinson's actual capacity. "She really does," Harry said, "and he looked for the right word, honest. She says what she means." "That's rarer than people think," Neville said, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lot of time in environments where honesty was not the default operating system. "Yeah," Harry agreed. They walked up in companionable silence, and Harry thought about Draco's face in the doorway, the flat, recalculating look. He thought about Pansy's 5 minutes and the way she'd said what he likes isn't the governing factor, with the conviction of someone who needed to believe it was true. He thought about the potion, half-made in its sealed cauldron, and the fact that it was a healing potion. He thought, there's something building here and it isn't only in the dungeon. He thought, Draco knows it too. Above them, the castle shifted in the way old castles did at night, the particular creak of stone settling, torchlight wavering in drafts from windows nobody could locate, portraits murmured, staircases considered their options. Harry went to bed. He did not stare at the ceiling this time. He fell asleep quickly and easily, the way you do when you're tired, in a way that has more content than exhaustion. When your mind is full of something that isn't worry, not exactly, but is the charged quality of standing at the beginning of something whose shape you can't quite see yet. Outside, the rain had cleared again. The grounds were silver in the moonlight, and the lake lay still and absolute, and the stone bench at the water's edge was empty as it always was at this hour. But it didn't feel empty the way it had before. Chapter 3, The Glass Wall. The jinx happened on a Wednesday. Harry heard it before he saw it, a sharp crack of displaced air from around the corner of the second-floor corridor, the specific sonic signature of a spell hitting stone rather than its intended target, and then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, and then nothing, which was worse than a continued sound because nothing meant whoever had fallen wasn't getting up on their own. He was moving before he'd finished processing it. He came around the corner, wound up, and took in the scene in about a second and a half. A first-year girl crumpled against the base of the wall, her robe singed at the hem, her face white and still. Beside her, a second-year Hufflepuff boy was backing against the opposite wall with his wand raised in the wrong direction, and the expression of someone who had done something by accident, and was so frightened by the result that his body had locked up. The corridor was otherwise empty. It was the tail end of lunch and most people were still in the Great Hall. Harry crossed to the girl in 3 strides and crouched down. She was breathing shallow, fast, the kind of breathing that meant pain rather than unconsciousness. Her left arm was against her chest at a wrong angle. "Hey," Harry said, "you're okay, what's your name?" Her eyes found his. It took a moment. "Elspeth," she said, her voice was small and tight. "Elspeth, I'm Harry, can you tell me where it hurts?" "My arm," she said. "My shoulder." He looked at the Hufflepuff boy. "What spell?" It wasn't, I was trying to do Wingardium Leviosa and it came out wrong and I don't know what it." "Okay," Harry said. "Put your wand down, right now. Put it down and go get Professor McGonagall. She's in her office after lunch most days." "Can you do that?" The boy put his wand down with the alacrity of someone extremely relieved to have a task that wasn't standing there. He ran, his footsteps echoed and diminished. Harry turned back to Elspeth. Her face was doing the thing where you are very committed to not crying because you're in a corridor and you're 11 and you don't want to, and Harry respected that deeply and decided not to acknowledge it. "The bone or the joint?" he asked. "What? Does it feel like something snapped or more like something pulled wrong?" She blinked at him. "Pulled wrong," she said. Like when you wrench something." "Dislocated then, most likely, not broken." Which meant it needed a qualified healer or a very specific spell. And Harry had the specific spell in his head, had read it in Magical Healing. Intermediate Theory, because he'd borrowed the book from the library last week, having looked at the title in Pansy's hands one too many times to remain incurious about it. But the spell required a precise wand movement and a clear picture of what the shoulder joint needed to do, and he had the movement and the picture but had never actually performed it. A voice behind him said, "Move." Harry moved. Pansy Parkinson was beside him before he'd fully registered she was in the corridor. She was crouching where he'd been crouching, one hand on Elspeth's good shoulder to keep her still, her wand already in position, and she was looking at the girl's shoulder with the focused clinical attention of someone who was genuinely assessing rather than performing assessment. "This is going to feel strange," she said to Elspeth. "Not painful, just strange. Don't move your shoulder when it happens, let it happen." Elspeth stared at her. Pansy's voice had no comfort in it, no warmth particularly, just absolute certainty, and Harry watched the girl respond to that certainty the way people responded to competence in crisis, with trust, because trust is faster than doubt when the alternative is pain. "Okay," Elspeth said. Pansy's wand moved. 3 precise motions, Harry knew them from the book, had read them twice, but watching her execute them was different from reading them. The way watching a musician play was different from reading notation. The wand described the shape of the motion with a clarity that suggested she'd drilled this somewhere private many times until the movement was seamless. "Reponer," she said, and the sound of it was quiet and exact. Elspeth made a small involuntary sound. Then she rotated her shoulder slowly and it moved correctly and her face shifted from white with pain to wide-eyed surprise. "That," she said, "that's better. It'll be tender for a day or so," Pansy said. "Go to Madame Pomfrey and tell her what happened. She'll want to check it properly." She stood up smoothly, already turning away, and Harry saw her catch herself, register the automatic retreat, and instead stay put, one hand still offered to Elspeth to help her up. Elspeth took it, got to her feet, looked at Pansy with the slightly dazed expression of someone recalibrating what they know about the world. "Thank you," she said. "Off you go," Pansy said. Elspeth went. The corridor returned to its quiet. Pansy lowered her wand, clicked it once against her palm in a small fidgeting motion that was the first genuinely uncontrolled gesture Harry had ever seen her make, and then seemed to remember he was there and looked up. He was watching her. He hadn't been subtle about it. "Reponer," he said. "Shoulder reduction charm, it's in Chapter 7 of the Intermediate Theory text. I read it last week." She looked at him the way she had in the dungeon when he'd confirmed he'd actually read the notes. The same recalibration. "You borrowed the book," she said. "I wanted to understand what you were working with." "That's," she stopped. "Why?" Harry looked at her steadily. "Because I was interested in it," he said. "For the same reason I pay attention to anything." She held his gaze. She did the thing where she held it a beat past the social norm, and this time whatever she was recalculating was visible in a way it usually wasn't, visible in the slight change around her eyes, the particular quality of someone arriving at a conclusion they weren't sure what to do with. "The spell requires absolute precision on the third movement," she said. "If you rush it, the joint reseats incorrectly and causes more damage than the original injury. You didn't rush it. I've practiced it." "On what?" "A model," she said. "Anatomical model for the healing tech's practical exam." "There's a practical exam. There's an independent study track through the healing arts extension curriculum," she said. "It isn't Hogwarts accredited. I've been sitting the exams through a St. Mungo's correspondence program." Harry stared at her. "You've been training as a healer independently? Since when?" "3rd year," she said, and the word landed with all its implications. She'd been doing this for 3 years in private, sitting exams in a program nobody at Hogwarts knew she was enrolled in. She held his stare. "It's not public knowledge." "I worked that out," Harry said. "Why isn't it public knowledge?" She gave him a look that had several layers in it. "The first layer said you know why, and the second layer said my family has certain expectations, and the third layer, underneath both of those, said something she didn't put into words and that Harry was careful not to reach for before she was ready to give it. It would invite questions," she said, settling on the most defensible layer, the most practical one. "From your family, among others." Harry was quiet for a moment. Down the corridor, the sounds of the castle had resumed, footsteps, distant voices, a teacher's measured tones through a classroom door. Life ongoing, indifferent to the thing happening in this particular stretch of second-floor hallway. "Does it bother you?" Harry asked. Keeping it quiet, she considered this. He appreciated that she always considered things honestly rather than reaching for the easiest answer. "Yes and no," she said. "I do the work regardless, the study, the exams. What other people know about it doesn't change the work. But I'm better at it than I'm supposed to be," she said, and it wasn't arrogant, it was a fact, stated in exactly the tone of someone who has had to sit with a fact they couldn't share and has developed a complicated relationship with it. "I sat the second-year healer's exam in April. I got an outstanding." "Pansy," Harry said. "Outstanding is the top grade," she said. And it's a second-year healer's exam, which is what qualified St. Mungo's practitioners are expected to achieve by their second year of training. I sat it at 16. She stopped. She'd said more than she intended to. He could see the awareness of it move across her face, the instinct to pull back. Harry didn't give her time to pull back, not cruelly, not in the way that forced confessions or backed people into corners, but in the way of simply remaining present and interested, so that pulling back would have required more effort than continuing. You should be doing this officially, he said, not through correspondence. My family, I know about your family, Harry said. But you fixed a dislocated shoulder in a corridor just now because you happened to be walking past. You didn't think about it, you just did it. She was quiet. That's not something you could fake, he said. That's not something you do because you sat an exam. That's something you do because it's what you actually are. The corridor was very still. Outside, through the window at its end, the grounds lay green and gray under low cloud, the lake a pewter-colored oblong in the middle distance. Pansy looked at him with an expression that he had not seen on her face before, not the composure, not the guarded measuring, not the almost smile that she deployed and withdrew at careful intervals. This was something rawer than any of those, something that existed on her face because she hadn't had time to construct an alternative. She looked like someone who had been seen. McGonagall will be here soon, she said, her voice was still steady. You should make sure you're here when she arrives, she'll want to know what happened. You should be here too, Harry said. I was in the corridor by coincidence. You're the one who cast the healing charm. You were here first, she said, and it's simpler, Pansy, Harry said, not loud, not sharp, just her name in a tone that said I see what you're doing and I'm not playing along with it. She stopped. Stay, he said. She stayed. McGonagall arrived 4 minutes later with the Hufflepuff boy in tow, and the expression she wore when she was concerned about a student but was expressing it through procedural efficiency, which was her preferred mode in a crisis. She took in the scene, the two of them in the corridor, Harry's wand at his side, Pansy standing slightly apart, and asked a precise sequence of questions that Harry answered precisely, including the part about Pansy casting the healing charm. Reponer, McGonagall said, looking at Pansy, that's not a standard curriculum spell. No, Pansy said. McGonagall looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across the older woman's expression, the specific kind of reassessment Harry had seen from teachers when they discovered a student wasn't the thing they'd been filed under. Well done, Miss Parkinson, she said in her brisk way. I shall speak to Madame Pomfrey. Off you go, both of you. Lessons will resume in 10 minutes. She went. The Hufflepuff boy went. Harry and Pansy stood in the emptied corridor. Well done, Miss Parkinson, Harry said. She gave him a look. Don't. I'm not doing anything. You're being, she searched for the word, pleased about it in a way that's visible. That's because I am pleased about it, Harry said. And I don't see why I should make it invisible. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag from where she'd set it against the wall. He hadn't even registered her setting it down. She'd moved so quickly when she came around the corner and said Thursday and walked away down the corridor. Harry watched her go. He was smiling. He didn't try not to be. The afternoon brought double transfiguration with the Ravenclaws, which was demanding enough to require Harry's full attention, and then a Quidditch practice that Ginny ran with cheerful ruthlessness, and that left Harry's forearms aching in a specific way that meant he'd been gripping his broom too hard, and then dinner, and then the common room. He was at the table with Ron and Hermione by 8, their usual post-dinner configuration of 3 people orbiting the same proximate space for different reasons. Ron was doing Charm's homework with the energy of someone excavating something from the ground with a spoon. Hermione was revising for Transfiguration, despite the fact that she'd clearly already mastered the material, on the grounds that mastery was a ceiling you raised rather than a plateau you rested on. Harry was trying to read Quidditch through the ages for enjoyment and finding that his attention kept drifting. You're doing it again, Ron said. Doing what? The thoughtful walking thing except sitting down. I saw something today, Harry said. Something or someone, Hermione said without looking up from her text. Harry explained it, the corridor, the first year, the Hufflepuff boy, the spell. He tried to be accurate about the sequence, the timing, the quality of what Pansy had done. Hermione lowered her book before he was finished. Reponer is a third-year healer's syllabus spell, Hermione said. You have to have passed the foundational healing theory exam to even begin practicing it. She's been sitting correspondence exams through St. Mungo's, Harry said. Since third year. Hermione's expression moved through several stations. The final one, Harry noted, was something very close to respect, though it arrived there by way of significant surprise. She's been doing that independently while maintaining her standard curriculum, while maintaining top marks in runes and potions, Harry said. Harry, Hermione said, I know, she stopped. Started again, that's remarkable, actually genuinely remarkable. The St. Mungo's program doesn't accept applicants under 18 unless they show exceptional ability, and even then, she shook her head. She must have applied at 13 and been assessed and passed the admission criteria. At 13, Harry said, while being a first-year Slytherin from a Death Eater family in a school that was probably watching her for the wrong reasons. Hermione said it quietly, and something in her voice had changed. Some of the architecture of her initial wariness had shifted, made room for something more considered. Ron had put down his charms homework. She never told anyone. Not as far as I can tell, Harry said. You've been in runes and potions with her for 6 years. 6 years, Hermione agreed. Not a word. The fire crackled. Around them the common room did its comfortable evening thing, younger students arguing over exploding snap, someone practicing a transfiguration incantation in a corner with varying success. The world going about its business. She fixed a first-year's dislocated shoulder in a corridor without hesitating, Harry said. And then tried to walk away before McGonagall arrived. Because taking credit for it would have invited questions, Hermione said. Yeah. A pause. Ron said, right, but Draco, what about him? He's going to know she spent Thursday evening with you. He's going to know about the corridor today. He's not, Harry, I've been watching him. He's got surveillance all over the place. He's using the younger Slytherins as proxies. You know how the house is, the loyalty structure runs vertical. The older students get information from the younger ones and up it goes. If you're spending time with Pansy, I know Draco's watching, Harry said. Do you know what he's watching for? Ron said. Because I don't think it's just about you, mate. I think he's watching for exactly this kind of thing. He needs her in his corner. Whatever he's doing this year, and he's doing something, he needs the people around him to stay in their positions. If Pansy starts, he gestured imprecise. Moving. Harry thought about the doorway, the flat recalculating look. 5 minutes. The way Draco hadn't looked at Harry and how that had been more pointed than looking at him would have been. He'll make a move, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said, and Draco's moves aren't stupid. They never have been. They're wrong and they're often cruel, but they're not stupid. Harry nodded. He thought about Pansy in the corridor, wand already moving, no hesitation. He thought about her trying to leave before McGonagall arrived. He thought about 3 years of correspondence exams and anatomical models and a second-year healer's qualification at 16. He thought about what it cost to be very good at something and keep it precisely that quiet. I'm not going to stop spending time with her, he said. I know, Ron said. I'm not telling you to, I'm just saying be ready. For Draco, Ron confirmed. Harry turned a page of Quidditch through the ages that he wasn't reading. I'm always ready for Draco, he said. Ron picked up his charms homework. Hermione returned to her transfiguration text and then about 30 seconds later lowered it again. Harry, she said, the St. Mungo's program. Hermione, I'm just saying, I know what you're saying, Harry said. Do you? You're saying it's unusual, Harry said. And the reason it's unusual isn't just that she's talented, it's that she's been building something entirely separate from her family's expectations and Draco's orbit and her public Slytherin life. For 3 years, quietly, in the same school where all of those things exist. Hermione looked at him. I was going to say it suggests significant personal courage, she said. But that's more or less what you said, Harry said. I'm also going to say, Hermione said in a tone of careful precision, that someone doing that is already, whether they know it or not, in the process of deciding what kind of person they're going to be. Harry was quiet. I'm just noting it, Hermione said and went back to her book. Thursday arrived with a cold clarity that suggested autumn was making its intentions known, and Harry went to the potions classroom and found the door locked. He checked the time. 7 exactly. He was on time. He'd been consistently on time. He had a streak going that he was privately pleased about. He tried the door again. Locked. He was considering options when footsteps came down the dungeon corridor, and Pansy appeared from the direction of the storeroom, carrying a small box of ingredients and walking with the focused energy of someone who had already been working for a while and had simply gone to collect something. You're early, Harry said. I've been here since 6:30, she said. She set the box down, drew her wand, unlocked the door with a tap and went in without waiting for him to open it. He followed. Inside, the cauldron was already uncovered from its sealed state and warming, the potion from their last session intact and deep violet, throwing a faint light upward that made the dungeon look like the bottom of a very still sea. Pansy set the new ingredients out in their order, and Harry watched her move around the workspace with the efficiency that always made him slightly in awe, not showing off, not even aware of being watched, just doing the work. You started early, he said. Why? The final reduction has to happen in the correct order and it requires more time than I'd initially calculated, she said. I revised the notes and adjusted the schedule. You revised the notes. Wednesday night, she said. The timing on the second Bicorn edition was wrong in my original calculation. I'd been working from the base text, not from the St. Mungo's annotated edition, and there's a discrepancy. The annotated edition gives a more accurate window. Harry put on his gloves and came to the bench. Can I see the revision? She pushed the notes toward him without comment. He read them. The revision was meticulous. She'd redrawn the timing chart and added a secondary note on the margin about temperature variance affecting the window. And at the very bottom, in handwriting that was smaller and neater than the surrounding text, she'd written account for partner adjustment time, coordinate in advance. He pointed to the last note. Partner adjustment time, he said. You need to be in the right position before the addition happens. There's no margin to correct once we start the synchronized stage. She wasn't looking at him, she was checking the potion's temperature. I should have noted it in the original plan. You're thinking about how we work together, Harry said. I'm thinking about the requirements of the potion, she said. Right, Harry said. They worked for an hour in the increasingly familiar rhythm, Pansy's certainty and Harry's attention, her technical precision and his reflexes. The way they developed without discussing it, a kind of divided attention that meant they could handle two variables simultaneously without getting in each other's way. It was the kind of coordination that you couldn't force, it either developed or it didn't, and when it did you tended not to notice it happening, which was probably part of why it worked. Harry was grinding Boomslang's skin when he said, without particular preamble, Draco came to your common room the other day. She didn't stop what she was doing. He checks in, she said. What does he tell you about what he's doing this year? Nothing, the word was very clean, too clean. Pansy, she turned the temperature gauge down by 2 degrees. He doesn't discuss his business with me, she said, and I don't ask. Is that by choice or by instruction? She looked at him. He held the gaze steady. By mutual understanding, she said, which you could call either. Is he safe? Harry said. The question landed differently than she'd expected. He saw that in the fractional widening of her eyes before she controlled it. She'd expected something about his mission, about Dumbledore, about what Harry knew or suspected. She hadn't expected that question. What? Is he safe? Is he okay? Harry set down the Boomslang skin. He's not the same as last year. He's not okay, whatever he's doing. I can see it. She was very still. I don't like him, Harry said. We both know the history. I'm not asking because I like him. I'm asking because you do. And because you looked worried in the doorway Wednesday when he came, and it wasn't the look of someone who's worried about getting in trouble. It was the look of someone who's worried about him. The silence went on long enough to have weight. The potion simmered. The dungeon dripped. He's not safe, she said finally. Her voice was almost inaudible. He's not okay. And I can't do anything about it because he won't let me, and because I don't know enough of what he's involved in to know what help would even look like. She stopped. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Okay, Harry said. That's it, okay? You said that's all you're going to say. I'm not going to push. He picked up the Boomslang skin again. I just wanted to know if I was reading it wrong. You weren't reading it wrong, she said quietly. I know, a beat. I'm sorry, that must be hard. She looked at him with an expression that said she didn't know what to do with that, which he was beginning to understand was her primary response to direct kindness, not rejection, not deflection, just a moment of genuine uncertainty, like someone receiving a message in a language they could understand but didn't speak fluently. She turned back to the cauldron. Bicorn horn, she said. 2 minutes. On it, Harry said. They moved into the synchronized final reduction with the coordination the notes had built toward. Pansy called the steps in a low, precise voice, and Harry moved when she moved, and they added the dittany, and the final ash compound at exactly the same second, wands moving together over the cauldron's surface, and the potion shifted from deep violet to clear soft green that was the color of shallow water in sunlight. That's it, Pansy said. Her voice was different, not quieter but warmer at the edges. That's the correct color, it's done. They both stood back. The potion sat in the cauldron throwing its soft green light, finished and functional, smelling of willow and healing and something that was neither, something that belonged to the specific chemistry of the two of them having made it. We did it, Harry said. We did it, she agreed. He looked at her, she was looking at the potion. In the green light of it, with her composure slightly loosened from the intensity of the final stage, she looked different. Or rather, she looked more like the person he'd seen in the library on Sunday afternoon, the person who existed inside the version everyone else got. There was something unconstrained about her face when she was doing the things she cared about. It was a small difference, probably invisible to anyone who hadn't been paying attention for 3 weeks, but Harry had been paying attention. For what it's worth, he said. She looked at him. What? You should be doing this at St. Mungo's, he said. Not through correspondence, not quietly, not in the space between everything else. You should just be doing it. She looked at him for a long moment. The green light between them, the finished potion, the dungeon quiet around them. "I know," she said, "and you will," Harry said, "eventually." She made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal. Then she began the careful process of bottling a portion of the potion for Slughorn's assessment, her movements economical and exact, and Harry helped, holding the vials steady while she poured, and the silence between them was the specific inhabited silence of people who have said important things and don't need to add to them. He thought about the corridor. The first year's arm, the speed of her movement, the certainty of the spell. He thought about 3 years of quiet exams and an anatomical model and a second-year qualification at 16. He thought, she already knows what she is. She's been building it since she was 13. She just hasn't decided yet if she's allowed to be it out loud. He thought, that's the glass wall, not between her and other people, between her and herself. The version she showed and the version she was pressed up against each other, both entirely real, unable yet to be the same thing. He wanted very much to be around when they became the same thing. He wasn't sure yet what that said about him, but he thought it was something relatively uncomplicated and entirely true. They were sealing the storage bottles when the door opened. Harry didn't look up immediately. He was holding the wax seal to the vial and the wax was at the right temperature and you couldn't rush it. Pansy's hands went still on the cork she was pressing. Draco Malfoy walked in. This time he wasn't in the doorway. He was in the room, which was different. The doorway had been surveillance. This was entry, a deliberate claiming of space, and the quality of his attention had changed. He looked at Harry the way he'd looked at him Wednesday, that flat, recalculating look, and then he looked at the bench and the finished potion and the 2 sets of hands that had made it, and something moved across his face that he shut down quickly but not quite quickly enough. "Pansy," he said, "we need to talk." "We can talk at 9, she said. "We're finishing up now," Draco said. His voice was still controlled, still perfectly modulated, but there was something below the modulation that had edges to it. "It's important." 10 minutes, Draco." He looked at Harry. "Do you mind?" he said, and it was perfectly framed in the social form of a polite question and contained not a single molecule of actual deference. Harry set the wax seal down and turned to face him. He didn't make a production of it, didn't angle his body for confrontation or put his hand near his wand. He just turned around and looked at Draco Malfoy with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has been told they're going to die in prophecy and has had 6 years to develop a high threshold for things that are supposed to intimidate him. "No," Harry said. Draco blinked. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected either compliance or aggression, and Harry had given him neither, just a simple, unembellished refusal stated like a fact about the weather. "I'm sorry," Draco said. "She said 10 minutes, Harry said. "So no, I don't mind, come back in 10 minutes. The silence was the specific silence of a balance point, a moment before gravity picks a direction. Draco looked at Harry and Harry looked at Draco, and neither of them moved, and the finished healing potion sat green and luminous between them, and neither of them looked at it. Then Draco looked at Pansy. "We'll talk later," he said, and his voice had changed, not softer but compressed like something being pressed down. He looked back at Harry one more time, and this time the look said something that wasn't about tonight, wasn't about a potions project, wasn't about 10 minutes. It said, "I know you, I know what you're doing, and I am paying attention." Then he left, the door closed. Harry turned back to the bench, picked up the wax seal. "Sorry," he said. "For what?" Pansy said. "If that made things harder." She was quiet for a moment. She pressed the cork into the final bottle with careful, steady pressure. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I know," Harry said. "I'm asking if it made things harder." She looked at the row of finished vials, their potion, green and finished and real. "He's used to people moving when he says move," she said. "It'll unsettle him." "Is that a problem?" She picked up the storage case and began placing the vials in it with neat precision. "I don't know yet," she said, and then more quietly, "but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing." Harry nodded. He helped her close the case. They sealed the cauldron together, side by side, and the green light went out, and the dungeon was only dungeon again, stone and torch and the distant drip of water from somewhere old and unreachable. "Thursday," Pansy said, heading for the door. "Thursday," Harry agreed. Then, "Pansy." She stopped but didn't turn fully. A 3/4 turn, the lake of her expression just barely visible. "What?" "The first year," Harry said. "Elspeth, you should know, she'll remember who fixed her arm. Kids that age remember who helped them when they were scared. That's not nothing." She was still for a moment. Then she turned and walked out, and her footsteps went down the corridor and faded, and Harry stood in the empty dungeon with a finished healing potion and a room that felt occupied in its absence in a way he couldn't quite rationalize. He thought about glass walls. He thought about Draco's face. He went upstairs and the castle settled around him, and somewhere above the clouds the stars did what they always did, which was exist without comment, and the whole complicated machinery of what was beginning kept turning. Chapter 4. What Slytherins Keep. The room was on the 5th floor. Harry wouldn't have found it on his own. It wasn't on the Marauders map, which was either because it predated the map's creation or because whoever made the map had decided it didn't count as a room, which was a judgment call Harry thought they'd got wrong. It appeared as a shallow indentation in the corridor wall, easy to miss unless you were looking for it, which most people weren't because most people were using this corridor to get somewhere else and not paying attention to the walls. Pansy had shown him on Friday, 2 days after the dungeon confrontation with Draco. She'd caught him after breakfast in the entrance hall, not seeking him out exactly but intersecting with his path with the deliberateness of someone who had decided to do something and was doing it before they could undecide. "There's something I want to show you," she'd said. Harry had looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Now," she said. "Before I change my mind about this." He'd followed her up 3 staircases and through a corridor he was certain he'd never used, and she'd stopped in front of a section of stone wall that looked identical to the stone wall on either side of it, touched a specific point on it with 2 fingers, not a spell, just pressure like a physical password, and the wall had opened inward with the soft scrape of old stone on old stone. Inside was a room. Not a large room, it had the dimensions of a generous cupboard or a very modest study. Stone floor, low vaulted ceiling, no windows. The walls were lined with narrow shelves that had been put there by someone at some point in the castle's long history, and had acquired over the years the gray, settled look of things that had been in one place for a very long time. The shelves held books, not Hogwarts library books, personal books privately owned, their spines a variety of ages and conditions. There was a reading desk against one wall, very small, with a stool in front of it. On the desk, a candle currently unlit, an inkwell and a set of quills, a stack of parchment that was clearly in use, and a St. Mungo's study manual open to a chapter on diagnostic spellwork. A single oil lamp hung from the ceiling, currently dark. Pansy said lumos in the quiet way she did things, and the lamp filled with light. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the room. He looked at the books. He could read some of the spines from here, Healing Arts Theory and Advanced Rune Translation, and one that said Pathways of the Pre-Modern Magical World, which was Ancient Rune Scholarship. He looked at the parchment on the desk, covered in her small neat handwriting, notes from the St. Mungo's manual. He looked at the St. Mungo's manual itself, which had slips of parchment inserted at various pages like she'd been here recently and had been interrupted mid-session. He looked at all of it for about 10 seconds and then he looked at her. She was watching him with her arms loosely at her sides and her face doing that thing, the glass wall thing, both versions of herself present at once, looking at each other sideways. She'd brought him here and she was waiting to find out if that had been a mistake. "How long have you had this?" Harry asked. 4 years, she said. "I found it in 2nd year. I don't think anyone else knows it's here." "You've been studying here for 4 years, Harry said. "When I could," she said. "The schedule requires management. There are evenings in Slytherin common room when I'm expected to be present. Draco notices absences. I've become reasonably good at." She paused, selected the word carefully, timing. Harry stepped into the room. He went to the nearest shelf and looked at the titles properly. The healing texts were organized by module: foundational theory, diagnostic practice, potion-based treatments, emergency spellwork. Beside them the rune scholarship occupied its own section: primary source translations, historical commentary, application theory. At the far end of the shelf, paper-clipped together, was a set of parchments he recognized as exam scripts, hand-graded with margins full of red commentary. "These are your graded exams," he said. "Don't," she stopped. "You can look," she said, which was not what she'd started to say, but she made herself say it. He looked. The top script was the one she'd mentioned, 2nd year healer's exam, outstanding in large official script across the top. Below it, a 1st year exam, also outstanding. Below that, foundational entry assessment, outstanding, every single one. He looked at the desk, at the current study manual, at the notes in her handwriting covering the parchment in dense, ordered rows. He looked at the room, the oil lamp and the low ceiling and the 4 years of private work accumulated on these shelves in a room that hadn't existed to anyone but her. "This is remarkable," he said. It's just study notes, she said. Pansy, he said in the tone that meant don't. She looked at the floor for a moment, then at the shelves. I started the St. Mungo's program the summer before third year, she said. I told my parents I was studying for the standard curriculum, which I was also doing. The correspondence materials came in plain wrappers. I arranged that through an owl that wasn't the family owl. Paid for the registration with birthday money I'd been saving. A beat. It was logistically complex. You were 13, Harry said. I was determined, she said. It's not the same thing, but it produces similar results. Harry almost smiled. He went to the stool at the desk and sat down uninvited, because he had the sense that if he remained standing and reverential she'd start pulling the disclosure back, and the disclosure was too important to let her pull back. Making himself at home in the room, treating it like a place rather than a shrine, seemed like the right instinct. He picked up the study manual, read the chapter heading, Diagnostic Charm Sequencing, Neurological Applications. This is third-year content, he said. You're already in third year? I'm working on it, she said. I need to sit the practical assessment. I've been doing the theory. There's a practical, supervised practical, yes. I need to go to St. Mungo's. She said it like the journey were immeasurably long, and Harry understood that the distance she meant wasn't geographical. You've never been, he said. I've been putting it off, she said, which was for Pansy an extraordinary admission, the admission of a person who was not in the habit of putting things off, admitting that there was a thing she'd been putting off. If I go for the supervised practical, it's registered. My name is on a form. If my parents, she stopped. The correspondence exams are tracked, but they're trackable only if someone specifically looks, which nobody has reason to do. A supervised practical at St. Mungo's is different. It's real, Harry said. Visible, she corrected, then after a pause, both. He set the manual down. He looked at her, standing in the room she'd built over 4 years in the lamp's steady light, with her arms still at her sides and her face still doing its complicated both at once thing. She'd brought him here. She was still deciding if that was right. He could see the indecision like weather on the surface of her expression. Why did you show me? He asked. She took a breath. It wasn't dramatic, just one breath, the kind you take before you commit to something. Because you saw me in the corridor, she said, with the girl Elspeth. And you didn't make it into anything other than what it was. You didn't decide it meant something about your picture of me before I could stop you. She stopped. You saw it and you left it as what it was, and that's rarer than people probably think. Harry was quiet. Also, she said, you borrowed the healing text, which was, she searched for a word that wasn't too much and wasn't too little. Disarming. I'll take disarming, Harry said. Don't, she said, but the corner of her mouth moved. Harry stood up. He went to the shelf again and pulled out the top exam script, the second year outstanding, and held it up. You know what this means, he said, not the grade. The grade's obvious, I mean what it means. She looked at the script. It means I passed. It means you're going to be a healer, he said. Not someday, not eventually, not if things work out, going to be, as in it's already decided, it's just a matter of time and paperwork. She looked at him. The glass wall was there, both sides of it, the composed surface and the thing underneath it that was not composed at all. That was a 16-year-old girl who had spent 4 years building something extraordinary in a hidden room and had never shown it to another living person, and was now in the room with someone who was looking at it and calling it what it was. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. Harry put the exam script back exactly where he'd found it because it was hers. I won't tell anyone about this room, he said, unless you tell me to. I know, she said. How do you know? Because you haven't told anyone about the healing program, she said. Or about what I said in the dungeon about Draco, or about any of it. She was looking at him steadily. You could have. It would have been useful information for various people in various directions. It wasn't mine to tell, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Something settled in her expression, a very small thing like a door that had been held at a crack opening one increment further. Not all the way, just one increment. You can come here, she said, if you want to study or whatever. It's big enough for 2 people. Harry looked around the room. It was very much not big enough for 2 people if 2 people meant 2 people and their books and their work. It was big enough for 1 person to be comfortable or 2 people to be cozy in a way that required some negotiation of space. Okay, he said. Thursdays, obviously we have the dungeon, she said, but other times. Okay, he said again. She nodded. She turned to blow out the oil lamp, then paused with her hand near the switch and said without looking at him, I've never shown anyone this room. I know, Harry said, I just wanted to note it. I know, he said again gently. She turned the lamp out. They went into the corridor and the wall closed behind them and the stone looked identical to the stone on either side of it, and the room was invisible again, which was the point. Sunday found Harry in the room for the first time on his own. Pansy had told him the pressure point in the wall, shown him twice until he had it. and he'd come up at 2 in the afternoon with his defense reading and his Half-Blood Prince's Potions text because the common room was impossible, and the library had Madame Pince in it, who had been looking at him with the particular suspicion she reserved for people who had been associated with library incidents. He lit the lamp and sat at the small desk because the stool fit, and the space was quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of a room that had been used for concentration for 4 years and had absorbed the habit of it into its stones. He got through 2 hours of defense reading and actually retained most of it, which was better than his usual rate in the common room. He was reading about the theoretical basis of nonverbal casting when the door opened. Pansy stopped in the doorway. "You're here," she said. "You told me I could be." "I know I told you." She came in, moving past him to the shelf without ceremony, which he appreciated. She pulled a book without looking at it. Her hand went straight to the right one, the habitual reach of long practice. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Why not? It's Sunday afternoon," she said, sitting on the floor against the opposite wall because there was only the one stool and she clearly wasn't going to ask him to move. She opened the book across her knees. "You have Quidditch people, Granger and Weasley, things to do. I have defense reading. You could do that in Gryffindor Tower." "Too loud," Harry said. He looked at her on the floor. "Do you want the stool?" "No," she said without looking up. "I always sit on the floor." Harry looked at the floor, cold stone, nothing on it. "That seems uncomfortable." "It's fine," she said, turning a page. "I've been doing it for 4 years. Harry reached under the desk where he'd noticed earlier a folded piece of fabric pushed against the wall, an old blanket or cloak he'd thought. He pulled it out, looked at it. A blanket folded small, the wool worn soft with use. He offered it without comment. She looked up, looked at the blanket. "I forgot that was there," she said. "Did you forget, or did you not want to use it while I was watching?" She took the blanket from his hand. "The defense reading," she said pointedly. "Right," Harry said. They worked in silence for a while. Him at the desk, her on the floor with her book and the worn blanket folded beneath her. The lamp burned steady overhead. Outside in the corridor, occasional footsteps passed and went. The castle did its castle things, which were subtle and pervasive and very old. After a while, Pansy said, without looking up, "The diagnostic charm sequence for neurological injury is similar in structure to the detection charms in the 4th-year defense curriculum. The wand movement pattern is almost identical." Harry looked up from his reading. "For the healer's 3rd-year practical, for the theory," she said, "I'm working out the practical mapping. The movement is a lateral sweep held at the finish point," Harry said. "For the detection charm, there's a variant for show me the wand movement," she said. He turned on the stool, drew his wand, performed the movement lateral sweep, clean pause at the finish. He made it deliberate and clear, the way Lupin had taught him things back in 3rd year, a pedagogy of precision that Harry had absorbed and applied ever since. Pansy watched him with intense attention. Then she drew her wand and mirrored it, not immediately perfect. The pause was half a beat early. "The pause is at the peak," Harry said. "Not as you arrive and then stop." She did it again. The pause landed correctly. "Like that." "Like that," Harry said. She did it 3 more times, refining each iteration, and Harry watched the thing happen that he'd watched happen when she brewed and when she cast Reponer, the adjustment and adjustment and adjustment until the thing was correct, the refusal to move on until correct had been achieved. It was a quality he recognized. It was, he thought, a quality that good people tended to share across their disciplines, the knowledge that the work wasn't finished until it was finished. "That maps to the diagnostic variant," she said, running the movement again. "The sweep is the same, the information it returns is in the pause duration. Longer pause, wider scan." She lowered her wand. "The St. Mungo's manual explains the principle but not the underlying mechanics. The defense framework explains the mechanics. They're drawing from the same runic theory," Harry said. "You told me Algis Willow for detection, different application but same root." She looked at him. "You remembered that. We've been over this," Harry said. She looked like she wanted to say something. She looked like she changed her mind about saying it. She went back to her book and Harry went back to his defense reading, and the lamp burned on and the room held them in its quiet, and it was, Harry thought, one of the better Sunday afternoons he'd had in 6 years at Hogwarts. Monday morning arrived with an owl. Harry saw it arrive at the Slytherin table, hard to miss because it was a large, pale bird with the controlled wings of a well-trained family owl, the kind that came from money and knew it. It dropped a letter in front of Pansy, folded its wings, and waited with the proprietary patience of an owl that expected a reply. Harry was at the Gryffindor table, far enough away that he couldn't see the letter, only Pansy's face when she opened it. He wished he hadn't looked because the thing that happened to her face when she read it was not something she would have wanted observed, and he was too far away to look away in time. It lasted only a moment, whatever she read, whatever it said, and then the composure came back down like a shutter, complete and immediate. She folded the letter, said something brief to the owl, which departed. She looked down at her breakfast. She didn't eat any of it. Zabini said something to her at that point, something low that Harry couldn't hear. She shook her head slightly. Draco, across from her, hadn't looked at the owl or the letter, which meant he already knew it was coming, which was its own piece of information. Harry watched all of this in the 30 seconds it took to happen, and then he looked at his own breakfast and ate it, and he thought about what Hermione had said. Her family have almost certainly Death Eater allegiances, and he thought about the owl's pale, controlled wings and the precise total shutdown of Pansy's face, and he understood that whatever the letter said, it had not been kind. He found her in the room at lunchtime. He hadn't planned to go there. He'd been heading to the Great Hall genuinely hungry, and his feet had taken him the other way again, up the stairs and along the corridor, and the pressure point in the wall had opened it with the ease of recent practice, and Pansy was there, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up and her arms resting on them, staring at nothing in particular. No book, no notes, just the room and the lamp she'd lit and the staring. Harry sat down on the floor across from her, not too close, not too far. He didn't say anything because she hadn't said anything, and he was operating on the by now established principle that pushing Pansy was counterproductive and waiting was usually right. She looked at him. "You don't have to be here," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Then why are you?" "You weren't at lunch," he said, "and you didn't eat breakfast after the owl." She looked at him with the same expression she'd had in the corridor after the shoulder charm, the expression of someone who had been seen when they hadn't arranged to be. "You were watching me at breakfast," she said. "I was in the same room as you," Harry said. "It's not surveillance, I just pay attention," she said. "I know." She looked at the wall opposite. "My father's letter." "Yeah," Harry said. He's been informed that I'm spending time with you," she said. "He doesn't name his sources, he doesn't have to." A pause. "He's displeased." "How displeased?" Harry said, and he kept his voice even because this was a moment that needed evenness. "Instructively so," she said. "He's written several paragraphs on the nature of our family's commitments and the importance of social alignment, and he's concluded by noting that he expects me home for Christmas, and that I should consider my associations carefully before then." Harry was quiet for a moment. He was doing several things internally that he kept off his face, because the things he wanted to say about her father's letter were not things that would help Pansy right now, and most of them involved language that wouldn't have improved the situation. "And the word Christmas," he said, "is doing a lot of work in that sentence." "It's a deadline," she said, "dressed up as an invitation. You know that. I've known my father for 16 years, she said dryly. It wasn't quite humor, it was sharper than humor, the particular irony of someone who has spent a long time being clear-eyed about something painful. She looked at her hands. "He doesn't know about the program. The healing arts, he doesn't know about this room." "He won't hear it from me," Harry said. "I know," she said. "Then the letter says I should consider my associations. He means you specifically. He's clever enough not to write your name. I figured, he'll have more to say at Christmas." "I know," Harry said. She looked at him. "You're not worried about that," she said. "About what that means for you, for your side, if you're not a political problem," Harry said. She blinked. "That's extraordinarily naive." "I didn't say the situation wasn't complicated," Harry said. "I said you're not a political problem, you're a person. The situation has complications." "Those aren't the same thing." She stared at him. The lamp burned. "Harry," she said, and his name in her voice was different from how it usually was, less controlled, with the weight of actually using it rather than deploying it. "You understand what my family is, what my father is almost certainly involved in." "Yes," Harry said, "and you understand what that means for this." She gestured between them, and the gesture was more than she'd meant it to be. He could see her clock it immediately, but she didn't retract it. "I understand what it means for the world outside this room," Harry said. "Inside this room, it means you got a letter from your father this morning that upset you and you haven't eaten lunch." She was very still. "Do you want to go to the Great Hall?" he said. "Or I can go and get something and bring it back if the hall is—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp, the shelves, the exam scripts in their neat stack. The room she'd built in 4 years of careful, hidden effort. And Harry Potter sitting on her cold stone floor in the middle of a Monday asking if she'd eaten lunch. "Why are you like this?" she said. It wasn't unkind. It was genuinely puzzled, the puzzle of someone encountering a phenomenon they don't have a category for. "Like what?" "This," she said, and she gestured again, the same gesture, and this time she didn't look like she regretted it. "I'm not sure I know what you mean," Harry said, and he was lying slightly, but he wanted her to say it. She looked at him. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You pay attention to the things other people walk past, the things people don't think to look at." She paused. Most people don't look at me, Harry, they look at the version of me that I arrange for them. And I've been doing it long enough that I'd stopped thinking the two things were separable. They're separable, Harry said. I know that, she said. Now. And something in her voice said because of you, even though she didn't say it, and Harry heard it in the space between the words, in the specific frequency of what she'd left out. He didn't make a thing of it. I'll go get food, he said, and stood up. You don't have to, I'm hungry, he said. I'll be 10 minutes. Don't study while I'm gone. You've been staring at your hands since you sat down, and your brain is not ready for the neurological diagnostic theory. She blinked at him. Then, quietly, the corner of her mouth moved. The diagnostic theory isn't that demanding. Take a break anyway, Harry said, and went to get lunch. The duel happened on Wednesday. Harry had known something was coming since Monday. The specific quality of Draco's awareness of him had changed, had sharpened into something that felt like decision rather than observation. In 5 days of classes, Draco had looked at him exactly 3 times, and each look had been the same, flat, measuring, arrived at. The look of someone who had made a calculation and was waiting for the right conditions. The conditions arrived at 5:30 in the defense corridor on the 2nd floor, which was empty at that hour because everyone was at dinner. Harry was coming from a conversation with Professor Aldrich that had run over, cutting back through the 2nd floor to avoid the bottleneck on the main stair. He turned the corner and Draco was there. Not coincidence. The arrangement of it was too precise. Draco was in the middle of the corridor, positioned, with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him at what they imagined was a useful distance. He'd timed it. He'd known Harry's route, which meant the surveillance Ron had mentioned was operational and specific. Potter, Draco said. Malfoy, Harry said, not slowing down. I think we should talk, Draco said. We are talking, Harry said. He did stop, because walking past Draco without stopping was the kind of thing that would have required something physical to enforce, and Harry didn't want Crabbe or Goyle doing something blunt and stupid that would hurt one of them and inconvenience everyone. He stopped 6 feet from Draco and faced him. What do you want? Draco looked at him with the flat, arrived-at quality that had been building all week. I want to tell you, he said, that whatever you're doing with Pansy needs to stop. I'm brewing a potions project with her, Harry said, as assigned by Slughorn, which I'm sure you know. I know about more than the potions project, Draco said. Harry looked at him. He didn't ask how, he just waited. She's distracted, Draco said. She's somewhere else half the time. She doesn't sit with us properly anymore. She's always. He stopped, compressed. Something was happening in his face that wasn't the controlled contempt Harry associated with him. This was something with more content than contempt, something that sat in a different part of the emotional register. She's a Slytherin, Draco said. She belongs in her house. That's just facts. She can belong to her house and talk to me, Harry said. You don't understand how things work. I understand fine, Harry said. You need her where you can see her. You need all of your people where you can see them because this year is, he watched Draco's face. Because this year is the year the thing you've been given is supposed to happen and you need everything controlled, and me pulling Pansy's attention is a variable you didn't account for. Draco's jaw was tight. Don't, he said. I'm not talking about your mission, Harry said. I'm talking about the fact that you're scared and you need the people close to you to stay put because the alternative is being alone with what you've been asked to do. Which is, Draco, I can see what it's doing to you. Anyone paying attention can see it. Shut up, Draco said, and his voice had an edge in it that wasn't contempt. It was rower than contempt. You're not okay, Harry said, and that's, sectum sempra. Harry had his wand up before the word was finished. Not pratigo, he'd gone for expelliarmus, his instinct so drilled into the motion that it was already done by the time Draco's spell reached him, and the sectum semper deflected off the shield that expelliarmus pulled up reflexively and hit the wall behind Harry, carving a line in the stone. Draco's wand flew in a clean arc and hit the floor. It was very quiet. Crabbe and Goyle looked at each other. Neither moved, which showed, at minimum, a capacity for threat assessment. Draco stood without his wand. His face was white. Not with fear, with something that was past fear on the other side of it, in the country of people who have crossed a line they were building up to for weeks and now have to live in the after. Harry stood with his wand out. He lowered it after a moment, not quickly, not because the situation required speed, but because there was no threat to answer. Draco without a wand in a corridor was not a threat, was barely even Draco in the usual sense, was just a boy with nothing in his hand, looking like something in him had finally cracked under the weight it had been carrying. Harry picked up Draco's wand from the floor. He held it out. Draco stared at him. Take it, Harry said. Draco took it. His fingers closed around it and he looked at Harry with an expression that had stopped being any of the things Harry associated with Draco Malfoy and had become something so unguarded it was almost uncomfortable to see. It lasted 2 seconds. Then the shutter came down and Draco was Draco again, composed and cold and buttoned up tight. "Leave Pansy alone," he said. "No," Harry said. He held Draco's gaze for a long moment. He meant it the same way he'd meant it in the dungeon, not belligerently, not to humiliate, just as a plain and unambiguous fact. He wasn't going to do that. The answer was number. Draco looked at him. Something moved across his face, a complicated thing, multiple registers at once. Then he said to Crabbe and Goyle, "Come on," and walked away, and they followed, and the corridor was empty. Harry stood in the defense corridor alone, with the carved line in the wall behind him in the quiet of a duel that had lasted about 15 seconds, and he thought about the face Draco had made when Harry handed back the wand, the 2 seconds of unguarded shock that had looked, if Harry was reading it right, almost like relief. He didn't fully understand that yet. He filed it under later and went to dinner. Pansy found him in the corridor outside the Great Hall at 8:30. He was leaning against the wall with a piece of bread from dinner that he was eating on his way back upstairs because McGonagall had called him to her office after the meal to discuss his transfiguration practical, and he'd had to leave before dessert. Pansy appeared from the direction of the dungeons, clocked him, and came directly to him without slowing. She'd heard. He could tell by the quality of her approach, the tight, directional energy of someone who has been sitting with information and has decided to act on it. "He told you," Harry said. "He told me you disarmed him," she said. "He tried Sectum Sempra first," Harry said. Her mouth tightened. Not at Harry, he could read the direction of it. She pressed her lips together briefly and then said, "Are you hurt?" "Not even slightly," Harry said. "The deflection was clean." "Show me," she said, reaching out with the automatic, unself-conscious gesture of a healer's instinct, hand out to check, to confirm, to verify. He held up both hands. She ran 2 fingers briefly along his wrist, which was the diagnostic point she'd been reading about, the one that corresponded to the detection charm sweep he'd shown her on Sunday. It lasted about 4 seconds, completely clinical, and then her hands were back at her sides and her face was back to its composed surface. "You're fine," she said. "I said I was fine," he said. "I know what you said," she said. "I like to check." Harry looked at her. "Are you okay?" "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because Draco just used a spell that could have done serious damage on someone you—" He stopped, found the right word. "On someone you care about." She was very still. "Then he's scared," she said. "I know," Harry said. "I told him that. It didn't land well." "It wouldn't," she said. "You telling him he's scared is he doesn't." She stopped. "Draco doesn't process vulnerability from external sources," she said. "Especially not from you. From you, compassion reads as something worse than contempt. Because I'm supposed to be the enemy." "Because you're supposed to be the enemy," she confirmed. "And if you're not, then the architecture of everything he's been told and everything he's committed to," she gestured, "falls apart," Harry said. "He can't afford that," she said. "Right now he really cannot afford that." Harry looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about this for months," she said, and something in her voice was tired in the way that people got tired from thinking about things they couldn't solve. "He's not a bad person, he's a person who was handed a thing he shouldn't have been handed and doesn't know how to put it down." "I know," Harry said. And he did. He'd been watching Draco with that understanding for weeks, which was exactly why tonight's duel hadn't made him angry. "Pansy, your father's letter, Draco's escalation, this is going to keep building." "Yes," she said, "and I'm not going to stop spending time with you," he said. He wasn't apologetic about it. He wasn't asking. He was telling her because she deserved to know the thing she was dealing with stated clearly. She looked at him for a long time. The corridor around them was quiet, the great hall's noise a distant rumble, the evening light from the windows going orange and long. She looked at him and she was doing the thing where both versions of herself were visible at once, except this time the glass between them was thinner. "I know," she said. "Is that okay?" he asked. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said yes, quietly but without qualification, without caveat, without the armor of irony or deflection she usually deployed when things got close to something true. Just yes, Harry nodded. He offered her the remaining half of his bread, because it was there and she probably hadn't eaten much dinner given the state of the Slytherin table after Draco's return, and she looked at the bread with an expression that was briefly priceless in its mixture of offense and reluctant hunger. She took it. She ate it in 2 neat bites and didn't say thank you and didn't have to, and they stood in the corridor while the evening light went and the torches came up, and something that had been building for weeks was now built, was standing, was occupying space, was as real as the stone floor under them and the old castle around them and the war outside it that was nobody's idea of a backdrop. Harry thought she said yes. He thought, the glass wall is thinner. He thought, Draco's going to make this harder before it gets easier and her father's letter is a deadline and the thing building outside this castle is going to arrive eventually and none of that changes what is true, which is this, right here, right now, this. The torches burned, the castle settled. Outside, the lake lay dark and still under a sky that had cleared to cold stars and the stone bench at the water's edge was empty. And somewhere in the history of this building, 1,000 things had begun in corridors just like this one, and most of them had mattered, and this mattered too. Chapter 5, Letters Written to No One. November arrived the way it always did at Hogwarts, not gradually but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch somewhere in the Scottish Highlands and decided that October was finished. The grounds went from gold to gray overnight, the lake's surface turned the color of old pewter, and the corridors acquired the specific chill that came from 500 years of stone that had given up trying to hold warmth by this point in the year and was simply committed to the cold. Harry noticed it the morning he found Pansy's second letter. He didn't find the letter itself, he found her, which was different and more informative. He was cutting through the library before breakfast, which he'd started doing on Tuesdays when the route from the 5th-floor room to the Great Hall made the library a natural passage point. He'd been using the room 3 or 4 times a week now, sometimes with her, sometimes alone, and the route had become habitual in the way that all the routes connected to her had become habitual, threaded into his week like they'd always been there. She was at the table near the back, the one that was her table that had her orientation and her lamp angle and her specific way of being in a room, but she wasn't reading. She had parchment in front of her and a quill that she'd been using, but the quill was down and her hands were flat on the table on either side of the parchment, and she was staring at the parchment rather than at it. Harry came in and went to her without pausing because pausing would have been an announcement and this clearly wasn't a moment that needed announcements. He looked at the parchment as he sat down. It wasn't her study notes. It was a letter half-written, her handwriting, starting and starting again at 3 different points, each fresh start crossing out the previous one. The words "Father, I understand your concerns" appeared twice. Below the second attempt she'd written simply, "Father," and stopped. She didn't look up when he sat down. "Don't read it," she said. "I already saw it," he said. "I'm not going to discuss it." She looked at him then. The state of her face was different from anything he'd seen before, not distressed exactly, more like someone who had been operating under sustained pressure for long enough that the performance of being fine had become genuinely difficult. She looked tired in the specific way of people who don't sleep because they can't stop thinking rather than people who haven't had enough hours. "Second letter?" he asked. "Third," she said. "In 2 weeks. He's escalating." "He's concerned," she said, and it was the same word she'd used about Draco in October, and it carried the same complicated freight, the word she'd been taught to use for things that were not exactly concern. Harry looked at the failed starts on the parchment. "You can't figure out what to say." "I know what to say," she said. "I know every word he wants me to say. I could write the letter that satisfies him in 10 minutes. She looked at the parchment. "I can't make myself write it." "Because it's not true," Harry said. "Because it would be a choice," she said. "Writing it would be active. It would be me choosing to go back behind a line I'm not sure I've crossed yet but I can see from here." She stopped, picked up the quill, put it down. "He wants me to tell him I understand my responsibilities. He wants me to tell him that Christmas is," she pressed her lips together, anticipated. "And is it?" She looked at him directly the way she did when she was about to say something true. "I'm frightened of going home," she said. Harry held her gaze. "Frightened how?" he said. "My father," she stopped, started again. "He doesn't shout, he doesn't do anything obvious, he's very calm, very clear. He explains things in a way that's almost reasonable, which is worse than shouting because shouting you can argue with and calm clarity you can't." She paused. "He'll explain to me calmly what the right choices are, and the word choice will be in there, but what he'll mean is there isn't one. And he's been doing that my whole life and I've been managing it. I've been building things he doesn't know about and keeping my head down and managing. But this year is different because," she stopped. "Because this year there's something to manage about," Harry said. She looked at him. Her hands were still flat on the table. He had the urge to put his hand over one of them, not for any reason beyond the simple, uncomplicated fact of wanting to, and he didn't, because this wasn't the moment to introduce a new variable into a situation that was already full of variables. "He knows we're spending time together," she said. He doesn't know. She gestured at the space between them, which encompassed the room on the 5th floor and the dungeon and the defense corridor and the bread in the hallway and every conversation they'd had that had been more than a potions project. But he suspects something has shifted. He's perceptive. He writes letters based on surveillance from inside the school, Harry said. He's doing it through Draco. Yes, she said, I know. Does Draco know he's reporting to your father, or does he think he's just keeping an eye on things for his own reasons? She was quiet for a moment. Both probably, she said. Draco has his own reasons, but he and my father have spoken. I'm fairly certain of that. Harry thought about Draco in the dungeon doorway, Draco in the corridor with the wand already out. The flat arrived at quality of those moments, the quality of someone acting on information fed from multiple directions. Pansy, he said. She looked at him. Your father is going to write more letters, he said, and Christmas is going to come. And none of that changes what you're doing, the program, the room, any of it. It changes the pressure around it, but it doesn't change the thing itself. You make it sound simple, she said. I'm not saying it's simple, he said. I'm saying it's separate. The pressure is the pressure and the thing you're building is the thing you're building. They're not the same thing even though they feel like they are right now. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, how do you do that? Do what? Separate things, she said. There are things in your life that should make it very difficult to separate anything. The war, the prophecy, Dumbledore, all of it. And you just, she made a gesture. You function, you're here, you're present, she stopped. How? Harry thought about this honestly, which he tried to do when she asked him something directly, because she asked things directly and they deserved direct answers. I spent a lot of years being scared, he said. Of what was coming, of what it meant, of what would happen. And at some point, I'm not sure exactly when, I stopped being scared of it and started being, I don't know, ready for it. And once I was ready for it instead of scared of it, I could just be in the present, because the thing coming is coming whether I spend today worrying about it or not. She was quiet. That sounds like something you learned the hard way, she said. Yeah, he said, but I did learn it. He paused. You're already doing it, by the way, the room on the 5th floor, 3 years of correspondence exams, an outstanding on a healer's second-year qualification at 16. You've been separating things for years, you're better at it than you think. She looked at the parchment, the failed letter, father, and the quill beside it. You don't have to write it today, Harry said. It's been 2 weeks. Another day won't. He'll send another letter if I don't respond, she said. The letters they're not the thing I'm most concerned about. The letters are just correspondence. It's Christmas. It's what happens at Christmas and the weeks before it, and she stopped very suddenly. Her hands moved, both of them off the table into her lap, which was the most obvious physical tell he'd seen from her, the hands coming off the surface and going out of sight when the thing being discussed got too close to something she couldn't hold steady. What happens at Christmas? Harry said carefully. He wasn't asking her to elaborate. He was repeating it because sometimes repeating something a person has said gives them space to hear how it sounds from the outside. She heard it. He could see her hear it. She looked at her hands in her lap. There will be people there, she said. People my father, she stopped. People whose affiliation is not ambiguous, she paused. And I will be expected to be comfortable with their presence, with what they represent. Harry was very still. I've managed it before, she said. I'm good at managing it, but this year, she stopped for the 3rd time in the same sentence, and each stopping was a door she couldn't quite walk through. This year I know more than I did. About what they're doing, about what it means, and knowing makes it harder to be comfortable, Harry said. Harder to perform comfortable, she said. The library was very quiet. Madame Pince hadn't arrived yet. It was early, before official opening hours, and the room had the particular quality of a space not yet occupied by its daily purpose. Just the shelves and the light and the two of them and a failed letter on the table. Harry looked at her, really looked, the way he did sometimes when he needed to be sure he was seeing what was actually there rather than what he expected to see. She was tired and she was frightened, and she was doing both of those things very quietly, which was, he'd come to understand, her primary mode of distress. Not dramatic, not visible to the room. Just a sustained, private pressure that she managed with competence and without complaint, which in some ways was much harder to witness than something visible would have been. You don't have to be comfortable with it, he said. You don't have to perform anything. Harry, I'm serious, he said. I know you've been managing it, I know you're good at it. But you're sitting in a library at 7 in the morning with a letter you can't write because you can't make yourself say what your father wants you to say, and that means something. That means the managing is getting harder. She looked at him. Something in her face was very close to the surface. You can tell me, he said. If you want to, I'm not going to. He stopped, chose the right words. I'm not going to turn it into anything, I'm just here. She was still for a long moment. The library's quiet held them. "I don't want to go home," she said. "Not I'm frightened this time, just I don't want to," in a voice that was very small and very honest and nothing at all like the voice she used for everything else. "Okay," Harry said. "I can't," she stopped, picked up the quill, set it down. "I can't not go home. He's my father, the financial, the practical. I'm 16, there's no version of not going home that works." "I know," Harry said, "and I want to be clear that I'm not asking you for." "Pansy," he said, "you don't have to be clear about what you're not asking for, you can just say the thing." She looked at him. The glass wall was thinner than he'd ever seen it. Both sides of it were visible in her face right now, the composed, managed surface and the person underneath it who was tired and frightened and had been running on managed and fine for long enough that it was becoming untenable. "I don't know how to be there and also be," she gestured at the space between them again. "This. Whatever this is at the same time." Harry looked at her for a moment, then he reached across the table not for her hands which were in her lap but for the quill. He picked it up, turned the parchment over to its blank side and wrote 5 words. He pushed it across to her. She looked down at it. "You don't have to decide yet." She looked at the words for a long moment. Then she looked at him. Something moved across her expression, something that was not quite any of the things he'd seen on her face before, that was more specific than relief and more complicated than gratitude, that had the quality of something loosening rather than something gained. "You're annoyingly reasonable," she said. "I've been told," Harry said. "It's a very irritating quality," she said, and her voice had come back to its normal register, back to the sardonic precision he'd learned to read as her version of being okay, at least temporarily. "Sorry," Harry said unapologetically. She looked at the 5 words on the parchment. Then she folded it, not the crumpled fold of something being discarded, the careful fold of something being kept, and put it in her robe's pocket. She picked up the other parchment, the failed letter, looked at it for a moment. Then she began to write. Not the 10-minute satisfying her father version, the tone was different from the first word, quieter, less performed. He didn't read it. He looked at his hands and gave her the privacy of not watching her write, and after several minutes she finished, folded it and set it aside. "Not the letter he wants," she said. "No," Harry guessed. "But the one I can write," she said. He nodded. She began putting the parchment and quill away with the neat efficiency she brought to all transitions, and he stood up, and they went to breakfast together, not quite together. He was half a step behind her because the library door required single file, and they walked without speaking, but in the specific comfortable silence that had become its own language between them. Ron was at the Gryffindor table eating toast in an architectural fashion, a precarious stack of toast slices that he was systematically demolishing from the bottom up, and he clocked Harry arriving and then, with the acuity that he deployed selectively and usually correctly, clocked where Harry was coming from. "Library," Ron said. Harry said, sitting down, "Before breakfast." "I like reading," Harry said. "You've never liked reading before 8 in the morning in your entire life," Ron said, not unkindly. "People change," Harry said. Ron looked at him with the expression that meant he was filing this accurately and had opinions about it but was choosing to keep them as opinions rather than commentary. He passed Harry the toast rack. Harry took 2 pieces. Across the great hall at the Slytherin table, Pansy sat down with the deliberate self-containment of someone recollecting their public arrangement, reached for a cup of tea and opened a book. Zabini said something, she responded, normal, arranged. The version of herself that the hall got. Harry ate his toast and thought about the 5 words on the folded parchment in her robe's pocket, and the 7 in the morning quality of her hands flat on the library table, and the way she'd said "I don't want to go home" in a voice that had nothing managed about it at all. He thought, that was the first entirely unguarded thing she's ever said to me. He thought, and she said it like it surprised her too. Hermione arrived, sat down, distributed good mornings with the efficiency of someone running an agenda, and opened her own book before she'd finished her first sip of tea. "You're early," she said to Harry without looking up. "Library," Harry said. "More," said Hermione, in exactly the same tone Ron had used, which meant they had discussed this. Harry ate his toast and decided to have no opinions about that. The week built toward Thursday the way weeks at Hogwarts built toward things, through lessons and mealtimes and the corridors between them, through the specific texture of November in a castle that took the season personally, through evenings in the 5th floor room and one afternoon where Pansy ran him through the diagnostic charm sweep sequence until he had it properly, which took 20 minutes, and left them both with the quiet satisfaction of a thing done correctly. He watched Draco across that week with the attention he'd been giving him for months. Something had changed since the corridor duel, not in Draco's animosity, which remained, but in its quality. The flat recalculating look had been replaced by something more complicated, something that Harry, studying it with more care than Draco probably knew, Thought looked like a person carrying too many things trying to decide which ones to set down first. On Wednesday he saw Draco in the astronomy corridor arguing with Crabbe and Goyle in a low, intense voice, and Crabbe and Goyle were looking at the floor and Draco was looking at the ceiling, and his hands were doing the thing that hands did when the person they belonged to was past the point of managing to be composed and had started managing to be just barely contained. Harry walked past. Draco saw him and the containment reasserted itself with visible effort. The effort Harry thought was significant. He told Pansy about it Thursday in the dungeon. They were cleaning up after a revision session for the Slug Club presentation. The potion was finished and sealed and wonderful, the presentation prepared, and the revision was more about making sure they could speak about the methodology clearly than about the methodology itself, which both of them understood inside out by this point. He's not sleeping, Pansy said. She wasn't looking at Harry. She was stacking the notes with the same systematic neatness as always. I can see it when he comes to breakfast. And he's thinner than he was in September. The mission, Harry said. Whatever it is, she said. I don't know what it is, I know it's real and I know it's bad. Whatever they've asked him to do, she stacked the final note. He won't talk to me about it, he used to talk to me about everything. Not everything, Harry said. Close enough, she said. We've known each other since we were 8, our families are adjacent in various ways. He and I have never been, I don't want you to think we were. I don't think anything, Harry said. I never assumed. She paused. You're frustrating to anticipate, she said, which was her version of thank you for not making assumptions. I know, Harry said. Pansy, what if there was a way to help him, not the mission, I mean him, the person? She looked at him. The candles in the dungeon were burning low. They'd been here 2.5 hours and the light they threw was warm and close, and Pansy looked at him across the stack of notes with her head tilted slightly and her expression doing its complicated both at once thing. You want to help Draco, she said. I'd want to keep him from doing something that destroys him, Harry said. That's not the same as wanting to help him, but it's close enough to be worth considering. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what you could do, she said. He's the people who gave him this, they're not people you negotiate with, and if he failed, she stopped. His family, his mother. I know about Narcissa, Harry said. She looked at him steadily. How much do you know? Enough, he said. Dumbledore talks, not everything but enough. She nodded slowly. Then you understand why there isn't a clean solution. There isn't a thing you can do that fixes it without, she gestured broadly at the entire complicated fabric of the war outside the castle walls. Without that being solved first. Yeah, Harry said, I know. She picked up her bag. He picked up his. They were moving toward the door when she stopped, turned, and said, Harry. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. It was the closest she'd come to the thing she'd been withholding, the thing that was behind the glass wall's last remaining thickness. She looked like she was standing at the edge of something. What? He said quietly. She took a breath. I've been thinking, she said, about the supervised practical at St. Mungo's. He was very still. I think, she stopped, started again. I've been putting it off because Visible felt too, she stopped for the second time. Then she made a decision clearly and visibly and said, I'm going to book it, the practical, before Christmas. Harry looked at her. Before your father's deadline, he said. It's not, she paused. Yes, she said, before Christmas. Good, Harry said. It might not, it will, he said. You don't know that. Pansy, you've been outstandings across every exam in the program. You can cast Raponer in a corridor on a first year's dislocated shoulder without hesitating. You're going to be fine. She looked at him. The last bit of the glass wall, the thinnest remaining layer, was right there, and he could see both sides of it clearly. The composed surface and the person underneath who was frightened of being seen and was allowing herself to be seen anyway, and they were so close together now that the distinction between them was almost academic. If I do this, she said, it becomes real, officially real, registered at St. Mungo's real. Yes, Harry said, and there's no, I can't unregister. No, Harry said. My father will find out eventually. Yes, Harry said, and you think I should do it anyway, she said. I think you've already decided to do it, he said. Otherwise you wouldn't be telling me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved, not the almost smile, something different, something with more commitment to it, something that was actually a smile though she didn't fully let it become one because that would have been too much all at once and Pansy did things at the pace she decided on, not at anyone else's. Annoyingly reasonable, she said. You said that already, he said. It bears repeating, she said. They went out into the dungeon corridor, and the door closed behind them, and the castle was dark and quiet around them in the specific way of late November evenings, when most of the school is already in their common rooms and the corridors belong to the cold and the torchlight. The thing with Draco happened on Friday. Harry found out about it the way he found out about most things, not from a source but from a symptom. He was coming back from Quidditch practice at 8 in the evening, cold and satisfied with the pleasant physical tiredness of 2 hours in the air, when he found Neville in the corridor outside the library standing very still with an expression that Neville only deployed in genuine emergencies. "Neville," Harry said, "what's wrong?" "The library," Neville said. "Harry, you need to." Harry went past him. The library after hours was unlit except for one table at the back, the table, Pansy's table, where a lamp was burning. She was there, but she wasn't sitting down and she wasn't reading. She was standing with her back to the main room, facing the shelves, and even from across the library Harry could see the precise, held-together quality of her posture that meant something was happening that she was working very hard not to let happen visibly. He crossed the library quickly and came around her and saw her face. She was not crying. She would not cry, he understood this about her absolutely. She was not built for public crying and she wouldn't do it even here, even alone, even when the thing warranted it. But she was very close to the place before crying. The place where the pressure is at its maximum and only the particular combination of will and training and practice self-containment is keeping the whole thing together. And he recognized that place because he'd spent time in it himself. On the table behind her was a letter. Not her father's neat formal hand, different. Rushed, sprawling ink not quite dry in places. She'd been reading it when whatever was in it had made her stand up. He didn't reach for the letter. "What happened?" he said. She looked at him. Her composure was intact, just barely, by the thinnest margin. "Draco," she said. He's fine," she said. "Physically," she stopped. He did something tonight in the room of requirement, something to do with whatever they've asked him to do. Something happened and he's all right, but something went wrong with what he was trying to do and she stopped. "He's been trying to fix a vanishing cabinet," she said. "That's what he's been doing this year. There's a matching one at Borgin and Burke's. If he gets them both working, it creates a passage into the castle." Harry went very still. The library. The shelves, the lamp between them. "A passage," he said. "For them," she said. "Into Hogwarts, that's the mission. That's what they've asked him to do." Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something that had texture, not quite horror, but the specific sick comprehension of information that has been half known becoming fully known. "Tonight something went wrong in the room. He was testing it and someone went into the cabinet on one end and came out wrong. Harry, they came out hurt. And Draco," she stopped. "He wrote to me because he didn't know what to do and he couldn't go to anyone else and he panicked." Harry's mind was moving very quickly, which was what it did in situations that required immediate processing, multiple threads simultaneously, threat assessment and response and implication running parallel. A passage into Hogwarts, a vanishing cabinet. Draco a year into trying to fix it and clearly not finished, given that tonight something had gone wrong. Time, he had time, but not unlimited time. And underneath all of that, Pansy, who had been holding the knowledge of this letter for however long since it arrived, alone in the library with a lamp and the particular weight of information that changes the shape of everything. "Who got hurt?" he said. "Where are they?" "A fifth-year Slytherin," Draco's note says. "She came out of the cabinet complaining of dizziness and couldn't stand. He got her to the common room and left her there." "She needs Madame Pomfrey," Harry said. "I know," Pansy said. "Pansy," he said. "I know," she said again, and this time what was in her voice was not the uncertainty of someone who doesn't know what to do but the specific tightness of someone who knows exactly what to do and is standing at the edge of doing it and understanding that once they do it, everything is different. "If I go to Pomfrey, she asks how I know. If she asks how I know, I'll go," Harry said. She looked at him. "I'll go to Pomfrey," he said. "I'll say I heard something in the dungeon corridors. I was coming back from practice. I'll keep you out of it. Can you give me the fifth year's name?" "Eleanor Vance," she said. "I'll go now," Harry said. He turned, then turned back. "Pansy, the cabinet." She met his eyes. "I need to tell Dumbledore," he said. The words sat between them. She looked at him with both sides of herself fully visible, the girl who'd grown up in a family whose name was in the war on the wrong side, and the girl who sat third-year healer's exams in a hidden room on the 5th floor, and the person who stood between those two things, which was the realist version of all. "I know," she said. "I know you do. This could save people," he said. "If we know what he's doing and when we can, Dumbledore can." "I know," she said for the third time, and the third time was different from the first two. It had a quality of arrival in it, something decided. "Tell him," she said. Harry looked at her. "Your father, tell Dumbledore," she said. "Eleanor Vance needs Pomfrey." He held her gaze for one more moment, and what he saw there was the clearest he'd ever seen the two sides of her, and the clearest he'd ever seen them not as two separate things but as one thing, the same person, both versions of her, standing in the same place at the same time and making the same decision. He went. He found Madame Pomfrey, who moved with immediate purpose when he relayed what he'd said, vague, directional enough. She went to the dungeons. He went up. Dumbledore's office was lit and Dumbledore was awake, which Harry had long suspected was the old man's default state regardless of the hour. Harry went through the gargoyle and up the moving staircase and knocked and went in and said the vanishing cabinet in the room of requirement. Draco's been trying to fix it. There's a match at Borgin and Burke's. Tonight something went wrong with a test. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. His expression was very still. How did you come by this? He said. Someone in the castle who isn't Draco told me, Harry said. That's all I can say. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You're protecting a source, he said. Yes, Harry said. All right, Dumbledore said. Sit down, Harry. Harry sat. Dumbledore moved to the window and stood looking out at the dark grounds, and Harry watched him and thought about the vanishing cabinet and the passage in the 5th year in the dungeon who'd come out wrong, and he thought about Pansy in the library with the letter, standing with her back to the room and her face toward the shelves, holding the thing together by will alone. He thought about what it had cost her to say tell him. He thought, that is courage. That is what courage actually looks like when it doesn't wear a red and gold tie. The girl, Dumbledore said. Pomfrey's with her, Harry said. She'll be okay. Good, Dumbledore said. He turned from the window. And Draco, Harry looked at him. He didn't know what to do, he said. He panicked and he wrote to someone he trusted because he had nowhere else to go. He paused. That's worth something. Dumbledore looked at him with the particular quality of attention he sometimes deployed on Harry, the look that meant something was being assessed that wasn't the information itself. Yes, he said. I think it might be. He sat down. What I tell you next stays in this room, he said. Okay, Harry said. I have been aware of the cabinet for some time, Dumbledore said. I've been monitoring Draco's progress without his knowledge. The cabinet is functional in theory but has flaws Draco is not yet equipped to address. He will not complete it this year, certainly not before the Christmas break and almost certainly not before the end of term. He paused. What tonight's incident tells me is that he's growing desperate. Desperation leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to exactly what happened this evening. People getting hurt without any of the intended strategic outcome. He's going to hurt someone properly, Harry said. Or himself, Dumbledore said. Yes, he looked at Harry. What I need from you, Harry, is patience and continued observation. And he paused. Your source, they're not safe the closer this gets. I know, Harry said. If they're willing to continue sharing information, I can't promise that, Harry said. It's not my decision. Dumbledore nodded. No, he said, it isn't. He paused. She's rather remarkable, he said, which was not a question in which Harry chose not to respond to, because Dumbledore was Dumbledore and Harry had known for years that privacy from Dumbledore was a polite fiction that both parties maintained out of mutual respect. He went back down the moving staircase and through the gargoyle and into the castle proper, and it was almost 11 and the corridors were empty, and he went to the library because it was where he'd left her and she might still be there. She was. The lamp was still burning. She'd sat back down at the table. There were no books open in front of her, just the table's surface and her hands on it and the lamp's circle of light around her. Harry sat down across from her. Eleanor, she said. Pomfrey's with her, he said. She'll be okay, Pansy nodded. Dumbledore knows about the cabinet, he said. He says Draco won't finish it this year. All right, she said. He wasn't surprised, Harry said. He's been watching. He watches everything, she said without bitterness, just accurately. Harry looked at her, she looked at her hands. The library was very quiet, the deep quiet of a building at night when all the people in it are asleep except the ones who aren't. You told me to tell him, Harry said. I know, she said. He stopped. That mattered, he said. That was the right thing and it was also a hard thing and both of those are true. She was quiet. It was the only thing, she said. When you know something is hurting people and you have the ability to not stop it exactly but interrupt it, Harry said. Interrupt it, she agreed. Then knowing and not saying is its own choice. She looked up at him. I didn't want to make that choice. I know, he said. They sat for a moment in the lamp's light and outside the windows the November sky was overcast and dark, no stars, the lake invisible in the blackness of the grounds. Harry, she said. Yeah. She looked at him directly and the glass wall was not there anymore. Or it was structural, it would always be there to some degree because that was who she was and that was fine, that was good, that was part of the architecture of her. But it was transparent in a way it hadn't been before, transparent enough that the two sides of her were visible simultaneously without any effort and without the distance that the composure usually maintained. She said, thank you, for the 5 words. And for going to Pomfrey, and for Dumbledore, and for being someone I could say tell him to. Harry looked at her. You don't have to thank me for any of that, he said. I know I don't have to, she said. He held her gaze. The lamp burned between them. He thought about Thursday evenings in a hidden room and exam scripts with outstanding written across the top and a first-year's shoulder, and a letter she couldn't write and bread in a corridor and yes said without qualification. He thought, I should say something. There's something that should be said here in this particular lamplight, in this particular library at 11 at night with the war outside and the two of them inside it, and it's been building for weeks and it's here now and she can see it and I can see it and this is the moment. He said, Pansy, she said, I know, very quietly, and then she reached across the table and put her hand over his, not a dramatic gesture. Not held, just placed, palm down, a point of contact, a small and deliberate and entirely unambiguous thing. He turned his hand over under hers. The library was very quiet. The lamp burned on. Outside, the November sky held its clouds. Somewhere in the castle, a vanishing cabinet sat in the room of requirement with a flaw Draco couldn't fix, and somewhere in the dungeons, a fifth year slept off a dizzy spell, and somewhere beyond the gates, a war continued its terrible business. And here, two hands on a library table in lamplight, something real and earned and quietly astonishing. They sat like that for a while, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else was needed, and the particular kind of courage it had taken to get to a library table in November and put a hand on someone else's and mean it, that kind of courage was not the kind that needed announcing. It just needed to be. Chapter 6, the space between houses the week after the library had a specific quality to it, the quality of something that has shifted and is still finding its new level, the way water does after you've dropped a stone in it. Not turbulent, just settling. Harry noticed the settling in small things. The way Pansy passed him in the entrance hall Tuesday morning and held his gaze a half-second longer than her composed surface usually allowed. The way she'd left a folded piece of parchment on the desk in the fifth-floor room Wednesday afternoon. Not a note exactly, just a page of annotations from the St. Mungo's diagnostic manual with a margin note in her handwriting that said you were right about the wand movement correlation, which was the closest she'd come to leaving him something without being present for it, which was its own category of thing. He'd written back on the same parchment, obviously, and left it on the desk. She'd written under that, insufferable. He'd written under that, Thursday. She'd written under that, Thursday. He kept the parchment. What he also noticed, with the attention he'd been honing for weeks, was that the castle around them was behaving like a system approaching a crisis point, the specific building tension of multiple pressures converging. Dumbledore had been absent 3 times in as many weeks, gone somewhere unspecified and returning with a hand that was worsening despite whatever treatment he was applying to it. The blackened skin creeping further toward the wrist in a way that Harry was increasingly alarmed by and could get no information about beyond Dumbledore's serene, infuriating assurances that everything was in hand. Draco had gone quiet in a new way, not the calculating quiet of October or the desperate contained quality of November, but something past both of those. He looked like someone who had been running a very long race and could see the end of it and didn't know what was on the other side. And the vanishing cabinet sat in the room of requirement, doing what broken things did while being worked on, waiting. Thursday happened. They were in the 5th floor room, which had become their default by this point, the dungeon sessions having concluded with the Slug Club presentation, which had gone well enough that Slughorn had enthusiastically told everyone present that their Wiggenweld was the finest student-brewed example he'd seen in 15 years, which Pansy had received with her polite architectural composure and Harry had received by saying thank you and meaning it. She was at the desk. He was on the floor with the blanket. They'd switched without discussing it, a natural redistribution that had happened around the 3rd week and now simply was how they used the room. He was reading the defense text that he should have finished 2 weeks ago. She was doing the 3rd-year St. Mungo's theory ahead of the practical she'd now officially booked. The appointment was confirmed, a Saturday in December 2 weeks before Christmas, before the deadline. The practical supervisor's name is Healer Ockhafer, she said without looking up from the manual. She has a reputation for stringent assessment standards. You'll be fine, Harry said. You say that very easily. I say it because it's accurate, he said. Do you want to run through the diagnostic sequence again? We've run through it 6 times. 7 is more thorough. She looked at him over the manual. The lamp was warm between them and her expression had the quality that had become his favorite version of her face, not the composed surface, not the unguarded vulnerability of the library, but the middle state, the one where both sides of her were present and she wasn't working to maintain either one. She just looked like herself, which was a thing he'd understood over the past 2 months was genuinely rare for her. 7 times, she said. I'll watch and tell you if anything's off, he said. You're not a healer. I know the movement well enough to, you know the defense variant of the movement, she said. The healer's diagnostic sweep has a different finish position. Then show me the difference, Harry said, and I'll watch for the right one. She set down the manual, drew her wand, performed the diagnostic sweep, smooth, lateral, the pause landing at a position a degree past where the defense charm ended. The finish held for the 2-beat count that widened the scanning range. She did it 3 times in sequence, not because Harry had asked her to, but because she was someone who did things until they were correct, and then did them again to confirm the correctness. Like that, she said. Third one was the best, Harry said. The second the pause came a fraction early. She nodded. I know. I can feel it. She put her wand away and looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone cataloging a correction. The timing is instinctive in the quarter context. There's something about the pressure of an actual patient that sharpens it. In practice, in a room with a supervisor watching, she paused. It'll be the same, Harry said. You don't know that. You fixed a dislocated shoulder in a corridor at 12:30 on a Wednesday, Harry said, without hesitation. Without a supervisor, with me watching, which if anything should have been more distracting than a professional examiner. Something moved across her face. You weren't distracting, she said. And then with the fractional speed of someone correcting themselves, you were. It wasn't an observed context in the same way. Because you'd stopped thinking of me as an audience, Harry said. She looked at him. Don't be smug about it, she said. I'm not smug, he said. I'm pleased. There's a difference. Very thin difference, she said. Fine line, he agreed. You'll pass the practical, Pansy. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she did something she'd been doing more often in the last week. She let the thing he'd said land without deflecting it, just held it for a moment, let herself receive it. I know, she said, quietly. And this time it wasn't the I know of someone dismissing something. It was the I know of someone who actually, genuinely, deeply knew. The owls came Friday morning at breakfast. Not unusual, owls always came at breakfast. But the volume was different and the quality of them was different, and Harry felt it before he consciously registered it, the way you felt a change in air pressure before a storm. The owls moved through the Great Hall with a purposeful density and landed in clusters, and the Great Hall went from its normal morning noise to a lower frequency, the frequency of people reading things that were not good news. Harry got the prophet. He read it. He put it down. Death Eater attacks in 3 locations overnight, 2 in Yorkshire, 1 in Edinburgh. The Ministry responding. Casualties confirmed but not numbered. Scrimgeour making statements that managed to be simultaneously alarming and useless, which was apparently his primary mode of governance. He looked at the Slytherin table. Pansy was reading her own copy of the Prophet with her characteristic stillness, but her stillness this morning had a different quality, the quality of someone reading their own name in a list they're not on yet, the proximity of it. She didn't look up. He didn't try to catch her eye. The moment didn't call for that. The Great Hall, 700 students all processing the same news, was not the space for the kind of communication they developed. He watched Draco instead. Draco hadn't opened the Prophet. He was looking at his breakfast with an expression that was not quite blank and not quite anything else. The expression of a person who already knew what was in the paper because they exist in a world where it was inevitable. The attack was not what Harry had been expecting. He'd been watching for the cabinet, for the internal threat, the passage into the castle. This was external, concurrent, and it changed the shape of what he thought the timeline looked like. He went to Dumbledore's office before first lesson. Dumbledore was already up and dressed, which meant he hadn't been asleep, which meant he'd known about the attacks before the Prophet carried them. He looked at Harry with the steady attention of someone who expected him to arrive. The timeline, Harry said. How bad is it? The attacks are a distraction, Dumbledore said. Coordinated to create pressure on Ministry resources and to send a message to those inside Hogwarts whose loyalties are monitored from outside. He looked at Harry carefully. Someone inside this castle is under pressure to deliver on a timeline that has moved. Harry thought about Draco's face at breakfast. The not blank expression. How much has it moved? I believe we have until the end of term, Dumbledore said, possibly less. End of term was 3 weeks away. The cabinet, Harry said. My assessment is that it is very close to functional, Dumbledore said. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but close. He paused. Harry, I want you to understand something. I am not going to ask you to act on this. The response to the cabinet when it comes is mine to manage. What I need from you is awareness. And he paused again with the particular weight of someone about to say something they've considered carefully. I need you to keep the people close to you informed and prepared, not operationally. Just aware, Harry looked at him. You're telling me to tell Pansy, he said. Dumbledore looked back steadily. I'm telling you to use the judgment you've demonstrated these past months, he said, which I think amounts to the same thing. Harry went to first lesson. He sat through Transfiguration without retaining any of it, which McGonagall would be disapproving about if she knew, and he thought about close to functional and possibly less than 3 weeks, and what it meant that the external attacks had happened the same night Eleanor Vance had come out of the cabinet disoriented and hurt. He thought about what they were building toward. He found Pansy at lunch, not in the Great Hall. She wasn't there, and he knew where to look. She was in the 5th floor room, not studying, just sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and the worn blanket folded under her and her eyes on the shelves full of 4 years of private, careful work. He sat beside her, not across, beside her on the floor, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. She didn't look at him. "The attacks last night," she said. "Yes," he said. "My father was in Yorkshire last month," she said. "He mentioned it in a letter. He was visiting friends," he said. She paused. "I don't think they were friends." Harry didn't say anything. "Cabinet is nearly finished," she said. "Isn't it?" He looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because the attacks happened last night," she said. "And the attacks they're not random, they're coordination, they're telling the people inside that it's time." She pressed her hands together in her lap. "Draco got a letter this morning, not at breakfast before, a private owl before 6, I heard it arrive." She paused. "He was different at breakfast." "I know," Harry said. "I saw him." She was quiet for a moment. "Harry," she said. "Yeah, tell me what Dumbledore said," not a demand. Just a request, in the voice that she used for things she was asking because she needed to know, not because she'd earned the right to know, which was a distinction she apparently made. He told her. End-of-term timeline, possibly less. The cabinet close to functional. Dumbledore's assessment that the response was his to manage. He didn't omit anything except Dumbledore's comment about her specifically, which belonged to the category of things he decided to keep because they were his to keep. She listened without interrupting. This was one of her qualities he'd come to rely on. She listened completely. She didn't ask clarifying questions until he was finished, and she was sure he was finished. When he was done, she said, "There are going to be people in the castle." "Yes," Harry said. "Death Eaters," she said, not with horror, with the flat accuracy of someone removing the euphemism to look at the thing clearly. "Through the cabinet, into Hogwarts." "That's the plan," Harry said. "Dumbledore will be ready." "Dumbledore's hand," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the shelves. "You've noticed," he said. "I'm training to be a healer," she said. "I notice things about people's physical state. His hand is getting worse. Whatever that injury is, it's not responding to standard treatment, which means it's curse damage of a significant kind, which means whatever he encountered that caused it, it was serious." She paused. He's Dumbledore," Harry said, which was not an answer but which she accepted as one because they both understood that Dumbledore was operating on a level that didn't map to standard assessment, and that there were things Harry was not going to discuss even with her. She nodded. "All right," she said. "Pansy," he said, "when it happens, when whatever happens happens, I need you to be somewhere safe." She looked at him. "I'm in Slytherin House," she said. "When Death Eaters come through a vanishing cabinet into Hogwarts, the assumption about where the safe spaces are." "I know," Harry said. "I know the assumption. The assumption is wrong in your case, and I need you to know where to be." "Where?" she said. "The room," he said. "This room, it's not on the map. Nobody knows it exists except you and me. If something happens, if I tell you to go, or if you see something happening and you can get here, come here." She looked at him steadily. "And if I can't get here?" "Then stay with people," he said. "Don't be alone, and," he paused, "your wand, keep it on you all the time." "I always keep my wand on me," she said. "More than always," he said. She held his gaze. "You're expecting it to happen soon," she said. "I think we should be ready for soon," he said. She nodded. Then she said, "The practical, December 14th. If things, you're going," Harry said. "Harry, you're going," he said, and his voice had the quality she'd first heard in the dungeon when he'd said no to Draco, not aggressive, not performed, just completely certain. "Whatever happens here, the practical happens. You've been working toward it for 3 years, and I will personally escort you to St. Mungo's if necessary." She looked at him. Something in her expression was the thing he'd started thinking of as the fully visible version of her. Both sides present, the glass transparent, nothing managed. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The lamp burned between them, steadying. He said, "Pansy," she said. "Yes." He stopped, tried again. Whatever this is between us, I want you to know that I know what it costs, for you, your family, your house, everything that's been built around you." "I know it's not nothing what you're giving up by, Harry," she said. "I'm trying to say something," he said. "I know what you're trying to say," she said. "And I want to say something first." She looked at him with the complete clarity of someone who has made a decision and is standing on the other side of it. "I've spent 4 years building things in secret because nothing I actually wanted was permitted in the version of my life that was arranged for me. I built this room. I built the program. I've been assembling the pieces of who I actually am in the spaces between everything else." She paused. "You are not a secret thing." "I'm not going to treat you like one," he looked at her. "I know what it costs," she said. "I've done the accounting, and I'm telling you that I've done it and the answer came out the same way every time." She paused. "You are not a secret thing," she said again more quietly. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he said okay, which was entirely inadequate and entirely sufficient at the same time. She reached out and tucked a folded piece of parchment into his hand, a new one, not the back and forth one he'd kept, a different one. He looked at it. She'd written something on it before she came here, anticipating or just deciding that the time had come. He unfolded it. She'd written, "I've known since the lake." The first Thursday, the rain. He looked up. She was watching him with the composed, clear attention that he'd learned was her most honest face. "You saw me," he said, "watching you." "You were at the window," she said. "Third landing, I saw you looking." A pause. "I kept reading because I didn't know what else to do." "You turned the page," he said, deliberately. "I'm good at deliberate," she said. Harry laughed. Actually laughed, the real unguarded version, and Pansy looked at him with the almost smile that had become a full smile somewhere in the last month and was now just her smile, not almost anything, just itself, and it was, he thought, one of the best things he'd ever seen. He folded the parchment and put it in his pocket. The cabinet became functional on a Thursday. Harry knew the way he always knew things that were happening in the castle's hidden spaces, not through magic or specific intelligence, but through the accumulated pattern of 100 small signals that, read together, told a story. Draco didn't come to breakfast. 3 Slytherin 7th years who had been present at the back of various classes for weeks weren't in their Thursday morning potions lesson. Slughorn mentioned their absence with mild surprise and moved on. Harry caught Hermione's eye across the room and saw that she'd already filed the same observation. He went to Dumbledore's office at noon, and the gargoyle was gone, or rather it was present but unresponsive, which meant Dumbledore wasn't in the office, which meant Dumbledore was already deployed somewhere in the castle. Harry stood at the gargoyle for 3 seconds. Then he went to find Ron. Ron was in the corridor outside the defense classroom where they had a free period, eating an apple with the calm focus of a man who had not yet had his afternoon disrupted. He looked at Harry's face and stood up immediately. "Now," he said. "I don't know," Harry said. "Soon, maybe now." "Hermione," Ron said. "Go get her," Harry said. "Library or the common room." "Tell her I said tell her alert status, she'll know." Ron went. Harry went to the 5th floor room. Pansy was already there. She was standing in the middle of the room with her wand in her hand and her bag over her shoulder, and the specific contained alertness of someone who had been waiting for something and was ready for it. She looked at him when he came in and said, "Draco's not in the castle." "You're sure?" "I went to the Slytherin common room," she said. "He's not there. His cloak is gone." "His trunk is partly packed." She paused. "He packed his mother's photograph." Harry absorbed this. "He's in the room of requirement," he said, "or on the other side of it. Can you—" "I'm going," he said. "Harry, I need you to stay here," he said. "Please, not because I think you can't handle—" "I know why," she said, not angry, just clear. "I know." She looked at him with both hands at her sides and her wand ready and her face the fully visible version of itself. "What can I do from here?" "The diagnostic," he stopped, thought. "If people get hurt, depending on what happens, if people need, I'll be ready," she said immediately. "The room has another function," Harry said. "If you need more space, touch the same pressure point 3 times in a row. I think it expands. I've never tried, but I've read about it." She nodded, filing it. He looked at her. He didn't know what the next hour held. He never knew what the next hour held, which was a condition he'd been living with for 6 years and had made a sort of peace with, but it sat differently right now in this room with her in it. "Pansy," he said. "Go," she said. "Harry, go." He went. The 7th floor corridor was wrong the moment he entered it. Not visibly wrong, it looked like the 7th floor corridor. It had its tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy attempting to teach trolls ballet and its familiar stone floor and its standard distribution of torches. But the quality of air in it was different, the charged, humming quality of magic recently and significantly deployed, and underneath that something that Harry's body responded to before his mind caught up, the warning signal of threat in close proximity. He walked fast, wand up. The door to the room of requirement was open. Not the concealed door that appeared when you needed it, an actual door, propped that way, which meant the cabinet on the Hogwarts side was functional enough to allow passage and the door had been opened to facilitate it. Harry went through it. Inside, the room of requirement had configured itself into something he'd never seen. Not the room of hidden things with its towers of accumulated objects, but something larger, darker, the room showing him what it had been holding, which was the vanishing cabinet on a raised platform at the center, surrounded by the evidence of a year's work. Books on repair, magical patches, the specific apparatus of someone who had been doing precise, sustained restoration for months. 3 Death Eaters in robes stood between Harry and the cabinet. Draco was there. He was standing to one side of the cabinet with his wand out, and his face the color of old chalk, and his eyes moved to Harry the moment Harry came through the door, and something in them was layered and terrible, relief and dread in the same expression, which was a combination Harry had seen on Draco's face in the defense corridor when he'd handed the wand back, and understood now as the look of a person for whom the arrival of the person they'd been opposing had become somehow also the arrival of the person most likely to give them a way out of something they couldn't get out of alone. "Potter," said one of the Death Eaters. Amicus Caro. Harry knew the face from Dumbledore's collected intelligence. His sister Electo was the second. The third was someone Harry didn't know, broad-shouldered, wand already raised. Harry assessed the room in about 2 seconds. 3 Death Eaters, one of them already raising a wand. Draco with his wand out but not aimed at Harry, which was notable. The cabinet behind them, functional and glowing faintly with the residue of recent dark enchantments. "Where's Dumbledore?" Amicus said. "He'll be here," Harry said. "We've been told he's unwell," Electo said. "The hand compromised." "You've been told wrong," Harry said. He hit Amicus with Expelliarmus and the unknown Death Eater with Stupefy simultaneously, 1 spell per hand, right and left, wandless on the left, which he'd been practicing with Aldrich for 2 months and which landed clean enough. Amicus's wand spun away. The unknown Death Eater dropped. Electo's spell came fast, Crucio, aimed with the precise speed of someone who had used it often and knew how. Harry deflected it not with a shield charm but with Expelliarmus again, aimed at the wall beside her, the rebounding force enough to throw her off balance so the curse went wide and hit the ceiling. 2 seconds. 2 of 3 disarmed or down. Electo recovering, reaching for something at her belt. Draco hadn't moved. Harry looked at him across the room. Electo was behind Draco now, between them, which made the angle complicated. "Draco," Harry said. Draco looked at him, the chalk-colored face, the layered, terrible expression. "You don't have to be here," Harry said. "I'm already here," Draco said. "I know," Harry said. "You can still leave." Electo raised something, not her wand, a stone or a focus of some kind, dark magic. Harry felt it before he saw it, and Harry cast Pratigo Maxima with both hands on his wand, the strongest shield charm he knew, which expanded to fill the space between them like a wall of compressed light. And Electo's curse hit it and shattered backward, and she stumbled, and Harry was already through the gap in the shield. He hit her with Incarcerus. Binding ropes from the wand tip that wrapped with the speed of something that had been waiting, and she went down and the room went quiet. 3 seconds. Harry stood in the middle of the room with 3 Death Eaters down or bound, his wand still up, breathing normally because he'd learned in the last year that panic was only useful if you let it fuel you rather than stop you. And when you were actually in it, when the thing was actually happening, you moved and you thought and you didn't stop for the feelings until the thing was done. Draco hadn't moved the entire time. He looked like someone watching something happen that they'd known was going to happen and had no framework for now that it had. Harry lowered his wand. "Come on," he said. Draco stared at him. He gestured at the 3 fallen Death Eaters. "I know," Harry said. "Alone," Draco said. "You did that alone." "I've done harder things," Harry said, which was entirely true and not a boast. "Draco, come on." Draco looked at the cabinet, the year of work, the glowing functional reality of it. "If I leave with you, I know what it means," Harry said. "You know what it means, you've known for a while." Draco's jaw worked. "My mother, Dumbledore's already working on that," Harry said. It was more than he could back up with specifics, but it was also true. Dumbledore had been moving pieces Harry couldn't fully see for months, and Narcissa Malfoy was one of them. He could feel it in the things the old man said carefully and the things he left out entirely. "You have to trust me on that." Draco laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Trust you," he said. "Right now specifically, yes," Harry said. "Tomorrow you can go back to hating me. Tonight, yes." Draco looked at him. The terrible, layered expression. Then something in it shifted, not resolved, not fixed, not anything as clean as that, but shifted, the way a locked joint shifts when finally moved in the right direction. He lowered his wand. "The cabinet needs to be destroyed," Harry said. Draco looked at it. "I know," he said. Something in his voice was grief, which Harry let him have. "I know." Harry destroyed the cabinet. He used Reducto 3 times at full strength, which was enough to reduce it to splinters that would be decorative rather than structural, which was the point. The room shook, dust came down from the vaulted ceiling, the glow went out. Draco watched it happen with the expression of someone watching the structure of their year collapse, which it was. Harry didn't apologize for it. "Right," Harry said. "They went. The corridor outside the room of requirement was not empty. Dumbledore was there, which answered the question of where he'd been. He was with McGonagall and Professor Flitwick and 3 other teachers whose faces Harry registered and filed. He looked at Harry, then at Draco, with an expression that contained approximately 7 different assessments and communicated all of them efficiently. 3 in the room, Harry said. 2 disarmed, 1 stunned, 1 bound. The cabinet is destroyed. Dumbledore looked at him with the particular look. All 3, he said. Yes, Harry said. Alone, Dumbledore said. Draco was there, Harry said. He didn't interfere. Dumbledore looked at Draco. Draco looked at the floor and then with visible effort looked up. The cabinet came from Borgin and Burke's, Draco said. Borgin has the specifications, you'll need to. Yes, Dumbledore said. Thank you, Draco. He said it simply without emphasis or drama, and the simplicity of it was somehow more significant than anything elaborate would have been. He looked at McGonagall. The 3 in the room need to be secured and the ministry contacted. He looked at Harry. Are you hurt? No, Harry said. Go, Dumbledore said. I know where you're going, it's quite all right. Harry went. He found her on the 5th floor, because of course she was there. The room had been ready for him, the lamp lit, the door open a crack, and she was standing inside it with her wand in her hand and her bag still on her shoulder and her face doing the fully visible version. She looked at him when he came in, a rapid clinical assessment that moved from his face to his hands to his posture and back. You're unhurt, she said. Completely unhurt, he confirmed. She exhaled. It was a very controlled exhale, the kind that had been waiting for the right trigger. She put her wand away. She set her bag down. She stood in the middle of the room she'd built over 4 years in the lamp's steady light and looked at him. Draco, she said. With Dumbledore, Harry said. It's complicated, but he walked out of the room. That's not nothing. She nodded. Something in her expression shifted, relief for Draco, tangled with everything else Draco represented, tangled with her father and the letter and the deadline, all of it together, and she processed it with the internal efficiency he'd come to recognize as her specific emotional register, fast, thorough, contained. Then she said, show me your wand hand. I told you I was. Show me, she said in the voice that was not a request. He held out his right hand. She took it, turned it over, ran the diagnostic sweep across his wrist, real this time, not practice, the healer's version, the paws held at the right position. Her wand tip was warm. The scan lasted 6 seconds. Fine, she said. Told you, he said. She didn't let go of his hand immediately. She looked at it for a moment, his hand in hers, which was the reverse of the library table and was also a different thing from the library table, was more deliberate and more specific, and then she looked up at him. The practical is in 2 weeks, she said. I know, he said. And after Christmas, she paused. My father's deadline, it's going to arrive. And I'm going to have to, she stopped. You're going to have the conversation, Harry said. Yes, she said, and it'll be hard, he said, and he'll be calm and clear and explain things to you. Yes, she said, and you'll tell him the truth, Harry said. She looked at him. Which truth? All of it, Harry said. The program, the room, the exams, all of it. He looked at her steadily. Not because you owe him the truth, because you've been building the truth for 4 years and it's ready to be real. Officially real, registered at St. Mungo's real. She looked at him. The glass wall was transparent and would always be transparent now, he thought, not gone. It was structural, it was part of her, but it would never be opaque in the old way again, the way that had kept both versions of her from seeing each other. And the other truth, she said. Which other truth? He said, which was not honest, but he wanted her to say it. She looked at him with the expression that was just herself, no armor, no management, just Pansy Parkinson in a hidden room in November with 4 years of healer's work on the shelves around her and her hand in Harry's. You, she said, that truth too, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he'll not take it well. No, Harry agreed. There will likely be a significant withdrawal of Pansy, Harry said. She stopped. Are you telling me you've decided, he said. She looked at him. She did the pause that meant real thinking, the pause that he'd learned to read as the most honest pause in her repertoire, not social calculation, not performance, just actual consideration. Then she said, I decided in the library when I put my hand on the table. Okay, Harry said. You're going to say that's enough, she said. It's enough, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The room around them, the shelves and the lamp and the worn blanket and the stack of exam scripts with outstanding written across the top of every one. 4 years of quiet, careful, extraordinary work. The hidden room that wasn't hidden from him. Harry, she said. Yeah, kiss me, she said in exactly the tone she used for everything, level, precise, entirely direct, no performance and no drama and no almost about it. He did. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not the kind that happened in films or novels with orchestral accompaniment and significant weather. It was a person and a person and a lamp and a November evening and something real, which was more than adequate. More than adequate by a considerable margin. When they pulled back, she looked at him with the expression that was just herself, and the corner of her mouth moved, and this time it moved all the way. Still annoyingly reasonable, she said. Still your description of me, he said. Still accurate, she said. He laughed. She did something she had never in his entire experience of her done. She laughed too. Not the almost laugh or the suppressed laugh or the controlled exhale that functioned as a laugh. The actual thing, brief and real and entirely unguarded, and it was the best sound in the room, better than the lamp and better than the quiet and better than anything he could have scripted. December 14th was a Saturday, and Harry was in the St. Mungo's waiting area at 9 in the morning, which was not where he'd expected to be when the term started, and was precisely where he decided he would be the moment she'd told him about the appointment. The waiting area was pale green and slightly too warm, with chairs that had the specific quality of chairs that had accommodated a great deal of worried sitting and were philosophical about it. Harry had a cup of tea from the vending machine that was not good tea but was hot, and he drank it and looked at the door Pansy had gone through 40 minutes ago with Healer Ackhafer, who had the reputation for stringent assessment standards, and who had looked at Pansy on their way in with the evaluating expression of someone who was about to form an opinion and would form it accurately. He waited. He was good at waiting when the waiting had content. He thought about the cabinet, which was splinters. He thought about Draco, who was somewhere complicated, not free exactly. The situation was too tangled for anything as clean as free, but on the other side of a door from the thing he'd been given, which was a start. He thought about Dumbledore, whose hand was no better and who had told Harry last week that there were things coming in the spring that they needed to discuss, which Harry was not looking forward to and was completely prepared for. He thought about Pansy's father, who had received a letter in the first week of December that had been written by Pansy in the 5th floor room while Harry sat on the floor with the blanket, and read his defense text and did not offer advice because she hadn't asked for advice. She'd asked for the room and his presence and those things he'd given freely. He didn't know what the letter had said. He knew it had been long and that she'd taken her time with it, and that she'd sealed it without letting him see it, which was right. He thought about the stone bench at the lake and the rain and the figure reading with the patient deliberateness of someone who had decided the weather wasn't relevant to what they were doing. The first Thursday of term, the thing that had started there in a storm without either of them deciding it. The door opened. Pansy came out. He read her face before she said anything. He was very good at reading her face by now, all the layers of it, the composed surface and the transparent glass and everything underneath, and what her face said was something he needed a moment to process, because it was the clearest, most completely unmanaged expression he'd seen her wear. She stopped in front of him. "Outstanding," she said. Harry looked at her. He stood up. He put the bad tea down on the chair beside him. He said obviously in exactly the tone she'd once told him was insufferable, and she looked at him with the full smile that had been an almost smile 4 months ago, and he thought, "There you are," which was what he'd thought the first time he'd seen it properly, and which remained entirely true. Healer Ackhafer said my diagnostic sequencing was the most precise she'd assessed at practical stage, Pansy said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was the thing that had been building for 4 years in a hidden room. The thing that was now real, officially real, registered at St. Mungo's real, visible and documented and nobody's secret. Of course she did, Harry said. She also said my theoretical grounding is at a level that would typically indicate formal academic preparation rather than independent study, Pansy said. She asked where I'd trained. What did you say? Harry said. I said I'd had excellent resources, she said. And then I told her about the correspondence program and she looked at me like, she stopped. She looked at me the way you look at me, she said. Like someone who sees what's there, Harry said. Yes, she said. He looked at her in the pale green waiting room of St. Mungo's on a December Saturday in the slightly too warm air, with the bad tea on the chair and the door she'd come through behind her and the year ahead of them with all its complications and its Dumbledore conversations and its father's writing letters and its war still doing its terrible business in the world. He looked at all of it and he looked at her, which was the most relevant part. What now? She said. Breakfast, he said. There's a place in Diagon Alley that does excellent tea, real tea, not whatever that was. He nodded at the vending machine. After breakfast, she said. After breakfast we go back to Hogwarts, he said, and we figure out the rest as we go. She looked at him. That's your plan, figure it out as we go. It's worked so far, he said. She pressed her lips together. It's an extremely optimistic approach to a very complicated situation, she said. You're going to be a healer, he said. I've handled more Dark Lords than anyone alive. Between us, I think we've got the complicated situations covered. She looked at him for a moment. Then she put her hand in his, not the library way, not palm on palm, but fingers interlaced, the deliberate version. This is a choice I'm making in public on a Saturday morning in St. Mungo's version. Breakfast, she said. Breakfast, he agreed. They walked out of St. Mungo's into a December morning that was cold and bright and startlingly clear, no rain, no grey, the kind of winter sky that was blue all the way to the edges. London moved around them in its busy, indifferent way, and the world continued its complicated turning. And somewhere in Scotland a castle sat above a lake where a stone bench stood at the water's edge, and the lake was winterdark and still, and the bench was empty and waiting as it always was for the next Thursday. There would be another Thursday. There would be many more Thursdays. And whatever came after, whatever the spring brought, whatever the war demanded, whatever the complicated arithmetic of two people from opposite sides of a very old argument worked out to in the end, it would be figured out as it went. It would be fine, more than fine. It would be exactly what it was, which was more than adequate and real and theirs.